Dragon Tamer. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326, High Level Meeting, Popularization of Magic Gold. Sitting within the third line of defense of Ash Castle, untouched by the fighting, this was the former train station square, which, before Liu Ming's departure, centered around the treehouse square and expanded outward, ultimately enclosed by the wall of ash. Within the treehouse villa, uninhabited since Liu Ming's departure, with the main hall serving as the highest conference room, the Ash Castle leadership convened another meeting. Liu Ming's former residence, after his disappearance, became a symbol of Ash Castle. However, compared to the pre-war deployment meeting, held a few days prior, which had felt as solemn as the approaching storm, the atmosphere of this post-war meeting was more cheerful and relaxed. At least half of this was due, not to victory in this war, but to the return of Liu Ming, the man who had once founded Ash Castle, as a savior. This war had been fraught with twists and turns. No one had anticipated that the Three Castles coalition, which had previously held an absolute advantage, would even recruit two powerful second-level lone travelers, Lu Daobianzen and Cigui Fengyu. Had Liu Ming not arrived at this moment, the outcome of this war would have been completely rewritten. It wasn't the coalition forces that suffered the devastating blow, but Ashford, whose strength was already insufficient to resist the combined forces of the three forts. Nearly 1/3 of the Ashford leadership present at the meeting was missing. Those who were absent were all severely injured, their wounds beyond the reach of current healing methods. They were all now offering sacrifices at the altar to receive healing grace. While this expenditure of divine grace was undoubtedly enormous, not only did Ashford already have more than it already had, but given the promised bounty of this war, even a small portion could easily provide the necessary healing grace to heal the severely injured. From his subordinates' words, Liu Ming learned that during his absence, Earth's timeline had shifted by approximately 6 months. Meanwhile, he had spent a full 6 months in the alternate dimension. It seemed that time on both sides was not perfectly aligned. Looking at the crowd, so transformed since he left, Liu Ming felt a surge of emotion, his expression remaining calm. With a hint of apology, he said, "I've been away for over 6 months due to strange circumstances. Thanks to everyone's hard work, I'm toasting you all." He then lifted the glass before him and drained the clear liquid completely. The wine served at the Ash Castle high-level meeting was naturally no ordinary item. It was the work of the brewmaster, the only person in Ash Castle who possessed a brewing-related auxiliary profession. However, even beer and liquor, commonplace in peacetime, are now extremely rare, let alone special alcoholic beverages imbued with elemental energy. This special alcoholic beverage, imbued with element beneficial to yuan qi cultivation, is stored as a strategic resource. It's generally not available to the public, but rather as one of Ash Castle's specialty products, used to exchange for supplies with other gathering places. This time, the joyous news of Liu Ming's return reassured Qin Yu, who considered magic wine the lifeblood of Ashford's economy. Qin Yu even unearthed a bottle of the most valuable moonlight amber magic wine from Ashford's stockpile of goods for sale, to satisfy everyone's appetite. The wine slid across his tongue, not the expected fishy spicy flavor, but rather a sweet, zesty tang, yet the flavor was no less potent than that of a strong liquor. It was like a handful of sweet spring water flowing into the mouth, instantly releasing a burst of refreshing alcoholic energy, leaving a lasting aftertaste. Cheers, boss. Ha ha ha, cheers. Boss is back, and the stingy Qin has been plucked out of his feathers. Happy occasion. Big happy occasion. Seeing Liu Ming finish his drink, everyone relaxed, appearing to be laughing and joking, but holding their glasses with great solemnity. They slowly downed the moonlight amber wine. Their solemn expressions amused Liu Ming, and the wine's unique flavor intrigued him. "This wine is unlike anything I've ever tasted." Qin Yu, who was in charge of brewing and sales, chimed in. "Haha, boss, you don't know this. I've named this wine Moonlight Amber. It's brewed by Gandu, our only brewmaster here at Ash Castle. The bottle we are drinking right now is the most successfully brewed and oldest bottle of Moonlight Amber. If it were sold, It would definitely fetch no less than 500 magic gold coins. After hearing Kinu's account, Liu Ming's eyes flashed. It wasn't the so-called moonlight amber, nor was it the rare and precious auxiliary profession of brewer, but rather the value Kinu had mentioned. It was the last 4 words Kinu had mentioned: magic gold coins. If memory serves me correctly, the last supplies he had collected before leaving included a massive amount of magic gold. Although he was almost certain, Liu Ming still asked one last question. Are the magic gold coins you're talking about the Star Moon magic gold coins? Kinu felt a flicker of confusion. Unsure of Liu Ming's reasoning, he replied without hesitation, yes, boss. It's the Star Moon magic gold coin. It's now widespread in the Xiangnan provincial capital. Even in Wuling, under the strong advocacy of the military and government, we've adopted it as the currency for exchanging goods, replacing the primitive barter system. He assumed Liu Ming's leaving meant simply leaving Wuling. It was said that the Star Moon magic gold coin was now widespread throughout the province and even the country. Logically, Liu Ming, had he been in a human settlement, would have heard of it. That was why Kinu was puzzled. Liu Ming naturally saw Kinu's confusion, but he didn't explain. He suppressed his excitement and changed the subject. The popularity of the Star Moon magic gold coin made it hard not to be excited. After all, the Star Moon magic gold he had collected was by no means a small sum. Given current purchasing power, while he couldn't quite recall the exact amount, he could still roughly recall it. 100 Star Moon magic gold, a common scroll like the one he'd used to upgrade to Beast Tamer, would only cost around 100 magic gold coins. For a scroll that could completely change the fate of a single apocalyptic survivor, to cost only 100 magic gold coins, one could only imagine how enormous a fortune that amount of magic gold was. Marjan, how's the prison account going? Liu Ming asked, turning to Marjan, who was seated below him. Boss, the coalition forces ultimately surrendered, capturing approximately 960 prisoners. Most of them were first stage A level evolvers or below. Those above first stage A level were considered the coalition's core and elite fighters. They knew they would face certain death even if they surrendered, so most chose to fight to the death. The final surrender by the coalition forces consisted of 30 A level professionals, 11 S level professionals, and 3 SS level professionals. From Hurricane Castle, Iron Fist Club, and Sandstorm Club. There were no professionals above that level. Chapter 327, Reorganization of Prisoners of War, the beginning of demon hunting. In a corner of Treehouse Square, near the sandy training ground, coalition prisoners were bound by their hands like grasshoppers, chained together in a row. Dozens of tough, imposing Ash Castle warriors, weapons drawn, gazed upon the over 900 prisoners with a mixture of wariness and hostility. In the recent battle, many of these seemingly obedient prisoners had surely killed their comrades. If not for orders from their superiors, these warriors would have been ready to tear these prisoners apart. The guards were all members of Fangan's Iron Hood Guards. Guarding prisoners outnumbering the guards by more than tenfold, they naturally could not afford to be complacent. Marjan immediately deployed his most elite Iron Hood Guards, the ones with the best preserved strength. Clad in gleaming silver armor, and wielding unsheathed divine weapons, they regarded the prisoners with murderous intent, as if they were cattle or sheep to be slaughtered. It wasn't until a bearded, unkempt figure arrived, accompanied by a group of high-ranking officers, that the warriors averted their murderous gazes and bowed respectfully to the Ashford leadership, led by Liu Ming. Few of the Iron Hood Guard knew Liu Ming personally, most were survivors selected from the ranks of new recruits. However, thanks to the explanations given by the other veterans of Ashford who knew Liu Ming, news of the return of the Master of Ashford spread like a whirlwind throughout Ashford. Except for those who had died in the war, the nearly 10,000 remaining members of Ashford were informed of this heartening news. The power and achievements of the mysteriously disappeared founder of Ashford were well known to the survivors. It was said that he established the Ashford point system, class divisions, and training of its combatants. He also spearheaded the construction of Ashford and the building of the Wall of Ash. The 3 behemoths, revered as guardians by the Ashford survivors, were also his dragon pets. Although most people had never even met him, his fairness to his subordinates and his immense strength were deeply ingrained through word of mouth. Feeling the excitement of the crowd behind him, Liu Ming, walking at the front, felt a mixture of emotions. He had witnessed the darkness of the apocalypse, the coldness and cruelty of human nature, and had already prepared for the Ash Castle to change hands, or even be destroyed. But imagine his shock when, 6 months later, Ash Castle still stood at its original location, and even his former subordinates remained largely unchanged, their respect and devotion for him even increasing. This was something he had never witnessed in those 10 years. Loyalty. Perhaps it was due to the continued loyalty of his 3 dragon pets, but the fervor led by Ma Jun, Liu Huchun, Fangen, and others was undeniable. Ma Jun, now the highest ranking official in Ash Castle alongside Gong Weixin, showed no reluctance to consider his return as an obstacle to his rise to power. Instead, he was genuinely overjoyed. Perhaps I made a wrong choice, but at least I didn't misjudge him, Liu Ming muttered to himself. After clashing with Lu Zuan and other top Wuling region experts, Liu Ming felt deeply that despite his immense gains in the alternate dimension, he was still not invincible. The gap between his own and those of these cutting-edge evolvers wasn't an insurmountable chasm. Lu Zuan might not have officially achieved the advanced class status of Sandstorm's Ward Master, but he already possessed the power to inflict severe damage. His improvement on Earth wouldn't necessarily be less than in the alternate dimension. Perhaps if I hadn't chosen to complete that quest, I could still be as powerful here as I'm now. After all, a dimension where chaotic matter had just entered, altering the underlying structure of the world, held immense potential and countless treasures to be unearthed. However, since I was already here, I had to make the best of it. Fortunately, I had returned, and the traces I left in this world hadn't been erased by time. You have 3 choices. First, become temporary combatants in the Ashford POW camp, charging into the most dangerous areas on the front lines of the upcoming battle, redeeming your sins through military exploits. Second, join Ashford's demon hunters. As the name suggests, these are teams dedicated to hunting all monsters for Ashford. However, unlike the official combatants of Ashford, all your demon hunters must surrender their gains until you have atoned for the sins you incurred during this war. As for the last one, Liu Ming paused, a murderous intent thickening from him like a sea of blood. Everyone knew the final choice without him having to say a word. Now, make your choice. Ma Jun, prepare the statistics. As soon as he finished speaking, Liu Ming left the prisoners' affairs behind and turned to walk towards the other side of the bookstore square. I choose to join the POW camp. I choose to join the demon hunters. I also choose to join the demon hunters. Over 900 combatants quickly split into 2 columns and made their respective choices, but not one chose the third, deadly path. In the end, 2/5 of the prisoners were sent to the humiliating prison camp, while the remaining 3/5 all chose to join the Demon Hunting Corps, including 3 SS rank professionals. After all, the very name of the prison camp evoked the humiliation of captivity. After Ma Jun counted the selected prisoners, he guarded them where they were and awaited Liu Ming's return. In a previous high-level meeting, Liu Ming had outlined his plan for handling these prisoners, but the specific operations and details still lay with him. Liu Ming had long envisioned the establishment of the prison camp and the Demon Hunting Corps, particularly the Demon Hunting Corps, hoping to forge the foundation of the Wuling Demon Hunting Society. He remembered the Wuling Demon Hunting Society, a branch of the National and International Demon Hunting Corps, as a formidable organization capable of competing with the military and political powers. Meanwhile, Liu Ming had already led his men to a spacious warehouse, 8 or 9 meters high, in another corner of the Treehouse Plaza. The warehouse was already overflowing with supplies confiscated during the war. The reason dozens of iron guards could safely guard nearly 1,000 bound devolvers was because these prisoners had been stripped naked from head to toe and dressed in prison-like clothing specially prepared for them. While not completely naked, they were still devoid of weapons or divine items that could grant them abilities. For human evolvers accustomed to weaponry, the loss of all auxiliary items, armor, and even weapons had decimated nearly half their strength. After assigning Ma Jun to the task of reorganizing the prisoners, Liu Ming headed straight for the warehouse to investigate Kenyu's progress in clearing the spoils. The mysterious item that had allowed Lu Zuan, Zeduo Heng, and Yang Wan to unleash their ultimate power at the crucial moment was a top-tier treasure that greatly intrigued him. Chapter 328 Visiting the Warehouse and Post-War Harvest. Boss, knowing Liu Ming would personally visit the warehouse, Qin Yu, who had already left the high-level meeting, was already waiting at the warehouse entrance, having come to sort out the overall harvest. Liu Ming nodded slightly. He was usually a man of few words, but 6 months of solitary existence in the alternate dimension, especially amidst the ruins, had made him even more reserved. Please follow me, Qin Yu said, leading the way inside. Ash Castle's logistics personnel were moving supplies around the warehouse like ants, using carts to carry supplies. This time, the coalition forces were coming with such force that the vehicles carrying the soldiers outnumbered all the vehicles in Ash Castle combined. The coalition forces were completely defeated before they could even break through the final line of defense, leaving Liu Ming with a prophet, who ordered them all to be collected. The logistics personnel were sorting the supplies, categorizing them, and registering them. This categorization system was established by Qin Yu, who took over the logistics department after Liu Ming's departure. Ash Castle's prosperity was also closely linked to this logistics director. This proved Liu Ming's decision to appoint this renowned Wuling entrepreneur to the post of logistics manager for Ash Castle was quite wise. Boss, we've suffered many casualties in this war, but we've also gained a great deal, Qin Yu said excitedly, standing before Liu Ming, waving his arms across the warehouse. The death toll in this war reached nearly 1,000, all combatants. This was a significant loss for Ash Castle, with a population of just over 10,000. This data had been shared with all senior management at a previous high-level meeting. The statistical gains now alleviated Qin Yu's sorrow over the heavy losses. The total number of divinely blessed weapons seized this time exceeds the total number of divinely blessed weapons in our Ash Castle by more than double. Among them are quite a few high-level divinely blessed items. Among them, the most exciting are the items belonging to the 3 leaders of the 3 castles, Lu Zuan, and the others, which you specifically asked me to collect. Qin Yu's voice became increasingly excited as he spoke. They're like walking treasure troves. Boss, this area is one of the storage areas specifically designated for the spoils of this war. All the items belonging to the leaders of the 3 castles are collected here. With that, Qin Yu led Liu Ming to a row of iron shelves filled with solid wooden boxes. Each box was at least half a meter square, and most were over 2 meters long and 1 meter wide, capable of holding a considerable amount of items. 2 evolutionists, radiating primal energy, stood solemnly before the shelves. They were the Iron Guards, under Qin Yu's orders, guarding the relics of the leaders of the 3 castles. After all, everything these 3 men carried was priceless. Even if one item were stolen, it would be a devastating loss to the entire Ash Castle, especially to Liu Ming himself. Qin Yu waved the 2 guards away, then walked over to the iron frame and pulled out the first box. This box contained the armor Zeduo Heng was wearing. While his Yuan Qi protected him from Liu Ming's more ferocious attacks than those of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, it was also due to the armor's defense. Otherwise, he would have succumbed to Liu Ming's blows long ago. Silver Wind Armor, that's the name of this armor. The 2-star white armor consisted of a single, lightweight chest plate, which Qin Yu had removed from Zeduo Heng's corpse and stored in his inventory. This piece of white armor was quite rare, as white divine items corresponded to the 2nd tier power level. Qin Yu and most of the high-ranking 1st tier evolvers in Ash Castle didn't possess even a single 2nd tier divine item. The only 1st tier evolvers in Ash Castle who possessed white items were extremely rare individuals, such as the necromancer Wu Zhangyan and Deputy Chief Ma Jun. Wu Zhangyan possessed a white undead magic item, which greatly aided in summoning the undead, while Ma Jun possessed only a weapon and 1 piece of white armor. At this stage, white divine items were considered the most advanced and scarce. Of course, sealed white items of potential were not uncommon, but white items capable of unleashing their full power were extremely rare. Each relic from the 3 fortress leaders occupied a separate drawer. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th drawers belonged to Zeduo Heng, each filled with armor and auxiliary items. The 5th drawer held the mysterious item Liu Ming had been waiting for. Wind Seal. The fifth drawer contained a long sword, originally Zedeo Heng's personal sword. It was also a white item, and a 3-star energy level. However, Liu Ming's attention wasn't focused on the sword. Instead, his gaze was fixed on a rune-like emblem lying quietly beside it. The white rune emblem, like a ray of starlight, shone in the wooden box beside the sword. The runes pulsated like a living thing, the glow so intense it made one wonder if it was a source of light. Liu Ming, however, sensed a rich wind energy within the glow. This emblem was undoubtedly a truly remarkable artifact. However, when Liu Ming examined the mysterious item more closely, his insight revealed that this wind seal was a consumable item. Having already been used twice by Zedeo Heng, its power had greatly diminished, though it still maintained a second-order energy level. Liu Ming sighed slightly. After all, an ordinary white item wouldn't be of much use to him. However, when Zedeo Heng used this wind seal, the destructive power it unleashed was already threatening him. Had he not teamed up with the phantom diva to drag Zedeo Heng, a swordsman who wasn't specialized in spiritual cultivation, into the illusion, the battle would have been a tough one, no less difficult than Lu Zuan's. However, he eventually suppressed his disappointment and looked at Yang Wan's belongings. Of Yang Wan's trophies, only the beast claw gloves, capable of summoning a phantom blue star tiger and causing a phantom blue starry sky to descend, caught his eye. The rest of the items were no better than Zedeo Heng's, if not slightly inferior. However, the last box in the second row once again contained an item that surprised Liu Ming. That black crystal, or rather, the magical item that sucked blood like a leech, giving Yang Wan a sudden surge in strength. He wondered if it would be compatible with the item's attributes, and if he could achieve the same boost as Yang Wan. He had little hope, considering his physical prowess was already slightly superior to Yang Wan's, and his true combat power far superior. These boosting items were typically based on the user's true strength. The stronger the strength, the lower the boost, and vice versa. He then glanced at the third row, the spoils from Lu Zuan. He had a vague feeling that the biggest surprise might still lie with Lu Zuan. To say that this legendary sandstorm swordmaster hadn't experienced any fortuitous encounters was a farce, and no one, including Liu Ming, would believe it. Chapter 329, Types of Divine Objects, Prelude to War. When the small, earthy yellow gourd, found on Lu Zuan's body, and placed close to his body in his inner armor, no more than 2 fingers long, and 1 finger wide, and resembling an exquisite work of art, appeared before Liu Ming, he finally confirmed his premonition. His clairvoyance, the words turbid sand gourd and earthborn divine object, dazzled him. His memory revealed that, while there were numerous divine objects, their numbers were extremely rare, and each one was incredibly precious. The magic camera was one such divine object, categorized as a redemption divine object. Earthborn divine objects also belonged to another category of divine objects, along with heaven-sent divine objects. The divine objects he knew of could generally be divided into these 3 categories. The appearance of redemption divine objects, of which the appearance is inseparable from various strange phenomena, is the rarest of the 3 categories. Earthborn divine objects are often magical objects born on Earth after a major shift in cosmic events, hence the term Earthborn. The reason for the appearance of heaven-sent divine objects is unknown, but it is certain that they originate from another time and space and mysteriously appear at a specific time and place, hence the term heaven-sent. Regardless of the artifact, each was exceptionally rare and priceless. Even acquiring a magical camera was a stroke of luck, and now, combined with the turbid flow sand gourd from Lu Zuan, it now held 2 divine artifacts. He removed the turbid flow sand gourd from its straw and examined it in his palm. The small gourd, already severely depleted of its power by Lu Zuan, had burst forth with immense combat power. It was now severely damaged, devoid of any remaining strength. Therefore, Liu Ming was unable to activate the gourd to discover its abilities. However, it was likely an earth-based ability, perfectly complementing his own Dizeng secret technique. Furthermore, Liu Ming's perception indicated that, while the gourd's power was severely damaged and could no longer be activated, its potential and essence remained intact. It could be restored by self-recovery and reabsorbing energy, condensing its might once again. This was a blessing in disguise. This gourd will be useful to me. I'll take it, Liu Ming said, turning to the crowd, before tucking the goods into his arms. Although Ashford still acknowledged him as its leader, and he had saved Ashford from peril, the spoils belonged to everyone, not just him. Furthermore, he had taken them, before they were even distributed, in full view of the crowd. Anyone could see that they were among the most valuable, so an explanation was necessary. Boss, you played a vital role in turning this war around. You have first choice among the spoils. King Yu, renowned for his fairness in Ashford, declared solemnly. Each word spoke with such force that everyone echoed their agreement. After accepting the turbid flowing sand gourd, Lu Xuan's remaining relics contained several valuable divine items, but they were far less valuable than the turbid flowing sand gourd. Liu Ming merely glanced at them and paid no further attention. After listening to Kinyu's inventory and classification of the seized supplies, he left the storage area and headed for the final destination, the four-color altar. Arriving at the altar hall, once the ticket office now housed the altar, Liu Ming spotted Gong Weixin, still dressed in white, standing outside the altar. Hearing footsteps, Gong Weixin turned and saw Liu Ming approach. "You're finally back," Gong Weixin said with a complex expression. Although she had heard from others that Liu Ming had returned and had turned the tide, nearly annihilating the coalition forces, she was still dazed and incredulous. "Your wound." Liu Ming's eyes flashed with concern as he gazed at the horrific wound Gong Weixin had sustained. It was the site of the dagger pierced by Sigi Fengaiyu, and due to the corrosive energy of Sigi Fengaiyu, Gong Weixin's injuries remained severe even after the war. "With divine grace, as long as the offerings are sufficient, it will heal," Gong Weixin said with a smile. "My wounds are healed, but your vitality?" As soon as she finished speaking, she seemed to think of something, looking at the grey-haired Liu Ming, and asked nervously. News of Liu Ming's pursuit and execution of the coalition leader, Lu Xuan, only to be severely wounded by Lu Xuan's final counterattack, had spread throughout the Ash Castle. This injury was far more severe than most people imagined, or perhaps not at all. After all, Lu Xuan's thick sand tome had merely absorbed Liu Ming's vitality, causing his physical functions to deteriorate beyond their peak state, and significantly reducing his lifespan. However, Liu Ming's combat power lay primarily in his mental power, which had not suffered significant damage. Therefore, the impact on his strength was not too severe. However, considering lifespan, a factor of great concern to most people, the injury was indeed severe. He had lost at least several decades of vitality, meaning his lifespan would be several decades shorter than that of an average person. However, Liu Ming remained unfazed by this drastic reduction in his lifespan. He knew of at least dozens of items that could increase vitality, and there would naturally be various ways to replenish it in the future. There was no need to rush. Hearing this, Liu Ming smiled casually and replied calmly, "It's nothing, just a little lost vitality. I can replenish it later." Gong Weixin's eyes dimmed at this, and she sighed slightly. Life force wasn't that easy to replenish. Liu Ming probably guessed her thoughts, but it was just groundless worry. It's true that there weren't many vitality replenishing items in the current period, but as time progressed, vitality replenishing items would appear one after another. While they weren't as common as they used to be, they were far more numerous than they are now, where they were almost impossible to find. Seeing Liu Ming's words, Gong Weixin, though still worried, didn't ask any further questions. She secretly resolved to find vitality replenishing items for him, but she knew the chances were slim. Who wouldn't want to live longer? Items related to longevity and vitality were not only extremely rare, but also rarely traded. He had never heard of any gathering place successfully trading vitality items. What about them? Liu Ming asked. The they referred to were naturally those whose injuries couldn't be healed with the current capabilities of Ash Castle, who had no choice but to resort to the altar and offer sacrifices to receive the healing grace. They're all still inside. How's Gu Yuan's injury? Liu Ming thought of Gu Yuan, whose body was nearly torn apart. Gong Weixin replied, "I'm not sure yet, but it should be healable." However, a hint of uncertainty crossed her brow. Gu Yuan's injuries were too severe, and even though the healing grace offered by the altar rarely failed, there was no guarantee that nothing would go wrong. After all, the altar wasn't a god, and sacrifices weren't omnipotent and arbitrary. Everything was subject to change. If he hadn't returned in time, Ash Castle would have most likely ceased to exist, considering the number of casualties and the serious injuries to his subordinates. Liu Ming looked around at everyone and said in a cold voice, "Wait until the wounded recover. Gather all the combatants. I will lead the people to overthrow the 3 small forts of Sandstorm, Hurricane and Iron Fist." The murderous aura in Liu Ming's words was overwhelming, making everyone feel the determination and murderous intent in his words. It seems that there is still a battle between Ash Castle and the 3 castles, but the relationship between the 2 sides in this war is reversed, and it will be a battle of revenge for the thousands of dead companions of Ash Castle. Chapter 330, Night Falls, Campfire Cooking. Each altar could only accommodate 1 sacrifice. Everyone gave the first opportunity to use divine grace to Gong Weeksin, the most senior of the injured, whose injuries were also extremely severe, and whose condition was worsening under the corrosive energy of the thorny rose wind. Following Gong Weeksin out of the altar hall was the Iron Guard Captain Gu Yun, who had caused everyone's trepidation. His lacerations had fully healed, though he remained somewhat weak. His recovery was a relief to everyone, and a newfound appreciation for the altar's wonders. Next, a group of seriously injured soldiers and 3 dragon pets emerged from the altar hall. The so-called altar hall, constructed by demolishing the ticket hall and reconstructing it to encompass the altar, covered an area of over 200 square meters, with a roof rising 7 or 8 meters high. Built from the same materials as the Wall of Ashes, it was the work of Gong Ruohan, the master craftsman of the flame barrier. Adjacent to the altar hall stood a building, only slightly shorter and larger. Constructed from the same materials, it housed not an altar, but the lair Liu Ming had once used to summon gargoyles. Since Liu Ming's death, the gargoyle lair, a breeding ground for gargoyles, has been left semi-abandoned, as only Liu Ming could control the gargoyle units it produced. However, the Ash Castle leadership understood the value of the gargoyle lair, as evidenced by their tireless efforts to construct a dedicated lair hall. By the time the last seriously injured person emerged from the altar hall, all those who could be healed had recovered. Time had passed from dusk, with the sun setting in the west, to evening, with the moon rising above the willows. A long-awaited bonfire dinner had begun in the treehouse square. All the survivors of Ash Castle packed the space. The noise was deafening, and everyone was incredibly excited. A war they'd almost never won had been won. Why wouldn't they be excited and celebrating? When Sumi unleashed a jet of fire, igniting the pile of wood that had formed a small mountain, the bonfire erupted, its flames shooting 7 or 8 meters into the air. The atmosphere instantly reached a fever pitch. With the exception of the prisoners still under strict guard, the dozens of iron guards guarding them, and the soldiers still on guard at the Wall of Ashes, all combatants and non-combatants joined the bonfire dinner. It was a celebration both of Liu Ming's return and of the victory. Gong Ruohan seemed much more mature than the quirky girl she once was. The flame art spirit, unchanged in size, still followed the girl like a shadow. Gong Ruohan sat silently by the fire, seemingly lost in thought. "What's wrong, Ruohan?" Gong Weeksin had somehow edged in beside Gong Ruohan, looking at her sister with concern. Gong Ruohan's voice was a little low. "Sister, do you think I'm useless? All the professionals went to the battlefield this time, and I've been staying on the last line of defense with ordinary people. Many of the evolvers I knew are no longer here. I wish I could fight like you." Gong Weeksin sighed slightly and replied, "Ruohan, everyone has their own mission. Your mission is different from theirs. As combat professionals, they naturally have to fight on the most dangerous front lines. And what about your mission? Think about it yourself." Gong Weeksin paused. Sometimes thinking something out yourself might make a big difference compared to hearing it explained to you. Gong Ruohan nodded and continued to stare blankly at the phantom flames in the campfire. Just as Gong Weeksin was about to counsel her again, Gong Ruohan suddenly awoke from her reverie and, as if suddenly enlightened, said, "I understand, sister. I'm a support profession, and not one that can fight on the battlefield like a healer, priest, or war priest. I'm merely a craftsman capable of building structures. Therefore, my mission is to build stronger and taller walls for everyone." "That's right, Ruohan. Your mission isn't to fight the invaders, but to build walls to protect us all. Without the wall of ashes, our first 2 lines of defense would have fallen long ago. Gong Weeksin was overjoyed to see her usually headstrong sister mature after this battle and defense. The bonfire still burned brightly, its flames not a fiery red, but rather a violet hue reminiscent of the cat's tail. And this violet flame wasn't as dim as other purple flames, but rather a brilliant one, casting its light across the treehouse square in the darkness. Led by K. Junran, the Ash Castle's magic chef, the Ash Castle logistics staff continuously brought in a variety of prepared food. At the request of the Ash Castle leadership, led by Marjan, all food at today's bonfire dinner was free. Everyone was allowed to eat and drink as much as they could, with the exception of taking leftovers. This was the second time, since Liu Ming's announcement, that the points system had been broken for food redemption. The first was the evening before the 9 castles attack, when all the ordinary survivors were organized to evacuate to the 3rd line of defense. Everyone also received a free dinner and a free breakfast the following day. By the afternoon of the next day, the war was over. Smiles filled the faces of all the survivors, celebrating not only their survival, but also the all-you-can-eat feast. While the free food might not be as varied as the plentiful food of peacetime, under the guidance of K. Junran, a skilled culinary assistant, even ordinary ingredients could be transformed into truly delicious dishes. Everyone gathered around the bonfire, devouring the feast with hearty bites. Ingredients were constantly being taken out of the Ash Castle's supply warehouse, and K. Junran and her staff were bustling with activity. Perhaps the busiest people tonight were K. Junran and her team, who were in charge of Ash Castle's food preparation. Cooking plate after plate of food kept her busy without a moment's rest, yet she remained perpetually smiling. It was Liu Ming who had rescued her from that nightmarish situation, and granted her the status of an evolved class. Her excitement for Liu Ming's return was unparalleled, and she prepared the food with extra dedication. However, the food she prepared was no ordinary delicacy, it was magical dishes imbued with enchanting power. These special foods, which possessed beneficial effects on both the body and cultivation, were naturally not available to ordinary people. They were reserved for the higher-ups of Ash Castle. The thought that the first thing Liu Ming would eat upon his return might be one of her own cooking intensified K. Junran's enthusiasm. It is also said that in this brutal battle in which thousands of people died, Liu Ming also suffered a severe blow to his vitality, so K. Junran ingeniously cooked a lot of magical dishes to strengthen the body and replenish the vital energy. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331, Flame Cuisine, Physical Improvement. When K. Junran arrived in front of Liu Ming on a ceramic plate, bearing a blazing platter of 3 steaks, seemingly ablaze with flames, Liu Ming remembered the head chef whose culinary skills had once amazed him. "Thank you," he said, taking the plate and looking at the still beautiful, now more mature girl before him. A flicker of nostalgia welled up in his eyes. Though less than a year had passed since his journey through time and space, returning to his homeland felt like a lifetime away. The treehouse plaza remained the same grey granite slabs. Familiar faces sat around him, seemingly waiting for him to recount his experiences over the past 6 months. However, Liu Ming had no desire to speak, lost in thought. Nearest to him were Liu Huchun, Marjan, Chu Gang, and Gong Ruohan. Further away were Yun Fanghua, Gu Yun, Fangan, and Wu Zhangyan, and, on the periphery, Gong Weeksin, along with his 3 young animal trainer apprentices, Wu Zongting, Zheng Fei, and Chadonja, along with many familiar figures. Many familiar faces had passed away over the past 6 months. Fortunately, most of the 13 former search team captains he had personally appointed were still alive, with Zhao Chen the only one who tragically perished. Despite the thousands of casualties in the battle against the 3 forts coalition, the loss of core personnel was minimal. While the Iron Guard chiefs were injured, no one was killed. This was a blessing in disguise. Liu Ming consoled himself with the thought. Hurry up, Liu Ming. This flaming steak is Sister Junran's magical specialty. I've been wanting it for ages. Give it to me if you don't want it. Just as Liu Ming was momentarily distracted, a hurried voice rang out, and a hand swiftly reached out to attack the plate in his hands. Liu Ming instinctively turned, preventing the thief's hand from reaching out. Responding, he saw the ever-outgoing Gong Ruohan, casting his magical hand on the dish specially sent by Kajunran. Liu Ming's lips twitched, and amidst Gong Ruohan's indignant expression, he placed one of the 3 palm-sized steaks into his mouth. He quickly chewed the steak until it was tender, the delicious juices instantly filling his taste buds, and Liu Ming couldn't help but savor the taste with satisfied eyes, squinting his eyes. To Liu Ming's even greater surprise, as the steak slid down his esophagus into his stomach, a surge of heat erupted in his abdomen. Then, countless smaller streams of heat coursed through his limbs and bones, radiating throughout his body. Nourished by the heat, Liu Ming's muscles suddenly improved at a noticeable rate. As the effects of the heat gradually faded, his physical strength instantly increased by nearly 1%. Considering his physical strength was no less than that of a second-tier Malay professional, this improvement was truly astonishing. Without giving it any time to think, Liu Ming immediately thrust the second steak into his mouth, swallowing it whole before even chewing it a few times. Then he moved on to the third. The miraculous heat from the second and third flaming steaks erupted simultaneously, nourishing Liu Ming's body and boosting it once again. When the heat dissipated, his strength increased by nearly 2%. A single serving of magical flaming steak had boosted his strength by nearly 3%. He suddenly yearned for this magical dish. What if this continued? But reason told him it wouldn't last forever. As expected, the moment he set down his cutlery, Gong Week's and somewhat stern voice echoed from the outside of the crowd. Gong Ruohan, what are you yelling about? The flaming steak only produces its powerful physical boost the first time you take it. Eating it again wouldn't be a waste of natural resources. Upon hearing this, Gong Ruohan sat down angrily, staring at Liu Ming's plate with a pout. By the way, where did this beef come from? Liu Ming suddenly asked. It was already 6 months after the apocalypse, and even the beef in the supermarkets was probably gone. Ordinary creatures like pigs, cows, and sheep, unlike humans, couldn't band together for survival, and had long since been slaughtered by the monsters. Seeing Liu Ming asking the question, Qin Yu, who was sitting by the campfire, gazing at the stars and enjoying the evening breeze, explained with a smug look on his face, haha, boss, do you know why this magical dish is called fiery fire steak? Gong Ruohan was already a little unhappy because he didn't get to eat steak. When he heard Qin Yu showing off, he directly retorted, everyone knows, isn't it just a magical dish made with those poor fiery fire buffaloes slaughtered, and the fiery fire beef? Fattykin, what are you showing off? Seeing that Gong Ruohan, the little devil, was taking his anger out on him, Qin Yu didn't show any annoyance at all. Instead, he smiled and continued, Manager Gong is right. The steak you are eating, boss, is made from a special evolved beast ingredient, fiery fire beef. This is an evolved beast that mutated from an ordinary beef cattle. We caught it and brought it back to provide meat. Liu Ming nodded, recalled this special ingredient, and muttered to himself, evolved beast meat, no wonder. In the apocalypse, where ordinary pigs, cattle, sheep, poultry, and livestock have largely become extinct, the source of meat has become evolved beasts with equally powerful strength and survival abilities. The fiery bull raised by Qin Yu and his companions is likely one of these species. Meat is an extremely rare food in the apocalypse. After all, every piece of meat comes from an equally powerful evolved creature, and only humans with evolved professions can handle it. In later generations, almost every powerful organization specifically raises evolved beasts to provide meat. This meat is definitely not something that ordinary people can enjoy. This situation has not changed much even 10 years after the apocalypse. Although many organizations and forces have large-scale breeding of domesticated and less threatening evolved creatures are still evolved creatures, and they are not something that ordinary survivors can afford. At this time, the staple food of ordinary people is still various grains. In particular, the large amounts of rice, flour, and other ingredients that I had collected before leaving are still the mainstay of Ash Castle's food. However, as humans, we naturally cannot survive without the protein found in meat. Some mutated plants also contain rich protein, and these plants have become the main source of protein for ordinary survivors. Liu Ming had once eaten the Crystal Cave's specialties, blood dew, Ganoderma and meat mushroom, which were unique plants rich in protein. Thinking of the Crystal Cave, Liu Ming's thoughts wandered, wondering what had become of the cave dwellers living there. His plans to develop the Crystal Cave had been delayed since he left Earth and ventured into another dimension. After annihilating the remnants of the three forts, his first priority was to develop the Crystal Cave's secret realm. The value of a secret realm was immense. It was because of the Crystal Cave that he had entered into a feud with Liu Ming, a powerful evolver destined to become renowned throughout Wuling. Truly, the world is unpredictable. Chapter 332, Sleepless Night. Much needs to be done. The moon was dim and stars were sparse, and night was falling. Despite the darkness, the bonfire in the treehouse square still burned brightly, and most people were still excited, not wanting to sleep. Amid the boisterous dinner, even the scattered monsters around Ashford were occasionally drawn in by the sounds and the lingering smell of blood from the battlefield. 3 mutants, now overlords of this group of cannibals, still maintaining a spiritual connection with Liu Ming, stood watch in the darkness. Any monster that could not approach Ashford's final wall, the Wall of Ash, was torn to pieces by the swift mutants that darted through the darkness. Liu Ming gazed out into the deep darkness beyond the wall, sensing the presence of the three, and a faint smile curved his lips. He had never expected that his unintentional action would prove to be a crucial aid to Ashford. Had it not been for the 3 cannibal lords driving back the horde of zombies west of Wuling City, near Ash Castle, it's doubtful Ash Castle's limited forces would have held out until Marjan and his men arrived, let alone until he could make it back. The 3 deformed mutants, like Sumi and Arthur, were at the pinnacle of the first stage SSS rank, just one step away from the second stage. However, this step was a chasm, difficult for anyone to cross. This time, the 3 mutants and their 3 dragon pets needed to evolve to the second stage as quickly as possible. As dragon-born creatures, the dragon pets should have evolved quickly, but their master's mysterious disappearance and slow progress in power, currently only at A rank, hampered their evolution. Otherwise, with their dragon-born talents, they should have reached the second stage long ago. Especially Arthur, the winged-clawed dragon snake. It evolved from the offspring of the alien beast Fei into a dragon-like creature. With its innate potential, it should have become a dominant creature in Wuling by now. Even the military and government wouldn't dare provoke it. Instead of being overpowered by Liu Ming, touching Arthur, still transformed into a bracelet on his wrist, and Sumi, lying beside him, Liu Ming murmured softly, "Master, I've let you down." Because of his disappearance, the 3 little ones, who should have evolved long ago, had wasted so much time. If he hadn't returned in time, they would have perished at the hands of Liu Ming and his men. Once we've defeated those guys, I'll take you to find an opportunity for evolution. Liu Ming promised solemnly, his brows brimming with determination. Sumi, after shrinking to a size no longer the kitten he'd held in his arms 6 months ago, was still the size of a lynx even at its most reduced form, dozing peacefully beside Liu Ming. Arthur's shrunken form had grown from a small bracelet to a thick, massive ring, resembling a weighty black jade bracelet around Liu Ming's wrist. Feeling the heavy weight, Liu Ming chuckled and shook his head, saying, "You've all grown up." Ji Zhenrong, on the other hand, was now scurrying about the crowd around the bonfire, running wherever there was food. Every time he lowered his massive head, the delicious food on someone's plate vanished, swept away by Ji Zhenrong. However, everyone seemed familiar with Ji Zhenrong's behavior, simply laughing and scolding him without the slightest surprise. Some children even played and laughed with Ji Zhenrong, who was several stories tall. Ji Zhenrong moved cautiously through the crowd, fearing he would step on the tiny creatures beneath his feet. His massive body wobbled as he dodged the crowd, looking rather comical. Liu Ming gave him a casual glance, and then paid no attention. As long as Ji Zhenrong didn't hurt anyone, he left him alone. The bonfire burned all night, dying just before dawn. Everyone slept on the ground in the library square. Liu Ming couldn't help but laugh as he watched Gong Ruohan, who had fallen asleep, reclining on Sumi's belly, clearly using it as a pillow. He didn't sleep that night, and of course, many others were awake. For example, Gon Weeksin, who had stood on the wall all night, sword in hand, facing the wind, wondering what she was thinking. And Qin Yu, sprawled on the ground, staring up at the night sky. And Marjan, drunk, yet no one visited him. Many people pondered over many things during this sleepless night. Dawn dawned, and they woke. Without the veil of darkness, the present state of Ash Castle unfolded before everyone. Collapsed buildings lay everywhere. Though the second line of defense hadn't been breached, the ranged attacks of the coalition's ranged specialists still affected it. The wall was riddled with holes, and in some places, there were even large gaps and cracks. The third line of defense, the largest area in particular, collapsed like a building being bulldozed at a construction site, crumbling in all directions. The battles between evolvers were no less intense than modern thermal warfare, if not more so. Most of these collapsed buildings were the work of high-level evolvers in the coalition. The devastation unleashed by individuals like Ruzuan could knock down the foundations of at least a 6-story building. Overall, after the devastation of war, Ash Castle was left in a state of complete ruin. Tens of thousands of people had lost their shelter. This was why the bonfire dinner lasted all night. A single treehouse plaza couldn't accommodate 10,000 people. The core area of Ash Castle, the final line of defense, housed the evolvers, key personnel, and senior management. The second line of defense housed key buildings. For example, Ash Castle's only small power plant was located within the second line of defense. Indeed, 6 months after the apocalypse, the flames of human civilization gradually began to reignite. Electricity reappeared in various human settlements. The ability to generate its own electricity was a crucial criterion for determining a settlement's strength and its eligibility to be called a small fortress. The breeding area, where the blazing bulls and other evolved beasts, the primary meat supply for Ash Castle, were raised, was also located within the second defensive line. Next was a vast training ground, providing daily training for the Iron Guard and the garrison. Then came several massive warehouses. After all, a single warehouse within the third defensive line couldn't hold all of Ash Castle's supplies. Then came the commercial district, where all transactions among the survivors of Ash Castle took place. Consequently, these two areas were devoid of residential buildings. Nearly 10,000 ordinary survivors lived within the third defensive line, and the buildings there were almost entirely residential. Of course, these weren't peacetime homes, but rather rebuilt after the apocalypse, from demolished high-rise buildings to adapt to survival. This type of housing offered greater protection against the volatile conditions of the apocalypse. However, it clearly couldn't withstand the devastation of advanced evolved beings. Chapter 333 Pre-War Plan, Revenge of the Ashes, Part 1. In another world, where endless dangers lurked, a good night's sleep was an absolute luxury for Liu Ming. So much so that upon returning, he'd slept for no more than 2 hours, waking naturally at the first light of dawn. Upon waking, Liu Ming didn't disturb anyone still asleep. Yesterday's bitter battle, while ultimately victorious for Ashford, had been a hard-fought victory. Nearly 1/10 of Ashford's survivors had perished in the conflict, and they were all members of the Iron Guard, its most vital component. This was a crushing blow to Ashford, which numbered only 2,000. Even the ordinary survivors, after the hasty evacuation and fearful hiding, coupled with the excitement of the bonfire dinner, were exhausted both mentally and physically. Qin Yu and Marjan, who had rested not far from Liu Ming, also rose upon hearing the noise. "Are you awake too?" Liu Ming glanced at them and smiled. Qin Yu said with a wry smile, "Boss, who can sleep in this situation?" Marjan shared a similar expression, a wry smile tinged with confusion. Yesterday at the high-level meeting, Liu Ming had already announced his plan to launch a counterattack against the remaining forces of the three forts. Everyone naturally welcomed the idea of successfully taking over the remaining base after the main forces of the three forts were annihilated. But the problem was, it wasn't going to be easy. A true attack on the three forts would be fraught with difficulties. Remember, the initial coalition consisted of 9 forts, with all 9 smaller forts west of Wuling City joining the attack on Ash Fort. Ultimately, only Hurricane Fort, Ash Fort, and Iron Fist Fort actually participated in the attack on Ash Fort. The remaining smaller forts, driven by their own interests and the Iron Guards who were constantly harassing the three forts' strongholds from behind, abandoned the alliance, withdrew from the attack, and retreated from the Ash Fort area. Despite their retreat, the 6 retreating forts certainly didn't abandon the lucrative Shard of Ash Fort. If the 3-fort coalition suffered heavy losses in capturing Ash Castle, the 6-fort observers, swarming around it like vultures in hyenas, would absolutely not recommend taking a single sliver of their prize, such as the 4-colored altar, that had intrigued countless hearts. The news of the 3-fort coalition's defeat would undoubtedly reach these carrion-eating hyenas and vultures. This was precisely what Marjan and Kinyu feared. The leaders and elite troops of the 3 forts had all been annihilated and captured. The remaining strength of the 3 forts was negligible. Even with the remaining troops of Ash Castle, they could capture it. While the process might be complicated, if Liu Ming took action, he would undoubtedly be able to crush all 3 forts in a crushing manner. What worried them most was the power behind these hidden agents lurking around Ash Castle. After all, there's no small fort without a second level evolver. A small fort without a second level evolver couldn't even be called a small fort. A second level evolver, at the top of the current evolutionary sequence, was undoubtedly a symbol of strength. It also serves as a deterrent, like a powerful weapon stationed at the heart of the action, deterring surrounding threats. This threat isn't just posed by the monsters surrounding the settlement, but also by the vigilance of various human survivor groups. In the apocalypse, supplies are extremely scarce. Small settlements, or even roving survival groups, struggle to obtain essentials. These groups often possess a few skilled individuals, otherwise they would have long been succumbed to the myriad threats emanating from the wilderness. The second level evolved beings in the small fortresses are tasked with deterring these survivor groups. They call these survivor groups lacking a fixed base or the ability to produce supplies and instead raiding settlements, mobs, or thugs. Their destructive power can sometimes rival that of hordes of monsters or even zombies. This is because they are more familiar with their own kind and understand their weaknesses. Furthermore, these individuals, driven by the pressure of survival, raid fellow survival bases to plunder supplies, even disregarding the lives of those who remain, have completely abandoned some of their humanity. Therefore, whether in small or medium-sized settlements or even large settlements like small forts with tens of thousands of survivors, these raiders were deeply resented. Yet beneath this hatred came a deep sense of war. They also learned from prisoners of war the origins of another woman, who, along with Lu Dao and Bianze, had been recruited by the 3-fort coalition forces. Cigui Fengyu, who had previously died at the hands of Liu Ming, was a wilderness raider. A caravan of nearly 1,000 mob raiders, commanding nearly 1,000 men, had just arrived in the Wuling region, after roaming and pillaging, when Zhuo Heng encountered and recruited them. Unexpectedly, the leader of the band, who had plundered several regions of Hunan and Chu, was killed in Wuling, while pursuing a business deal. It was rumored that Zhuo Heng had signed an agreement with the raiding caravan, which was still stationed at Hurricane Fort. An attack on Hurricane Fort would likely encounter them. It's unclear whether the raiders knew of their leader's death. If so, Hurricane Fort would likely be in chaos. Hurricane Fort, with its elite troops fully deployed, had a relatively small number of remaining personnel, and even if they were slightly stronger than the raiding caravan, they were unlikely to be much stronger. If the coalition forces were defeated, especially with the news of the deaths of several leaders, Hurricane Fort, leaderless and without control over the raiding caravans, would likely be thrown into chaos by internal and external troubles. This would undoubtedly make Hurricane Fort the most vulnerable of the 3 forts. However, this was merely speculation. It's possible that upon learning of the deaths of their leaders, the raiding caravans left behind by Sigi Fengyu, driven by hatred and seeking revenge for their leaders, would temporarily join forces with Hurricane Fort. If the two joined forces, Hurricane Fort would instantly become a formidable opponent. Consider that the raiding caravan consisted of over 1,000 men, all seasoned warriors with extensive wilderness survival and combat experience. Even though the number of evolved was still small, these battle-hardened elites were already capable of threatening the Iron Guards of Ash Fort. These rumors and speculations were discussed repeatedly at yesterday's high-level meeting. But no matter how much they discussed it, the ultimate outcome was only one. The revenge counterattack plan against Sanbeo must be carried out. To prevent any delays and give those lurking Hyenas an advantage, the counterattack date was set for today. Liu Ming was determined to capture Sanbeo, and even if more troops were waiting in the dark ahead, this decision remained unchanged. Chapter 334 Pre-War Plan, Revenge of the Ashes, Part 2. Looking at Ma Jun and Qin Yu, Liu Ming simply ignored their unhappy expressions, understanding their concerns. However, they didn't realize their full potential. Even against Lu Zuan, Liu Ming hadn't played all his cards. Trapped in the thick sand tomb, those cards were largely useless. Therefore, Liu Ming wasn't particularly concerned about the stalkers. Furthermore, looking at it from another perspective, no matter how powerful the stalkers were, they couldn't possibly outmatch Lu Zuan and his 3 companions combined. Otherwise, Lu Zuan and his 3 factions wouldn't have attacked without hesitation. Even Lu Zuan had died at his hands, so those guys were naturally even more vulnerable. Their concern was simply the disparity in strength among the lower ranks. After all, after this battle, Ash Castle's lower ranks had been reduced by nearly half. But this wasn't a battle of generals versus soldiers anymore. If the strongest leaders of the stalkers were defeated, their subordinates, left without a leader, would naturally collapse. He offered no explanation, believing the facts would speak for themselves. He simply asked, if we choose a primary target, which small fort do you think would be best taken first? Boss, many Hyenas are waiting for our attack. If we act, we'll likely be besieged. Ma Jun didn't directly address Liu Ming's question, but offered an indirect suggestion. No need to persuade me. This counterattack is a must for revenge. Anyone who dares to intrude will only seek death, Liu Ming said, frowning. Seeing Liu Ming's resolute expression, Ma Jun and Qin Yu exchanged a sigh, finally realizing the situation was hopeless. With a wry smile, they began to discuss the matter. After a moment, Ma Jun glanced at Qin Yu, signaling him to recount their deliberations. Hurricane Fort is 9 kilometers to our west, Sandstorm Fort is 7 kilometers southwest, and the Iron Fist Club is the closest, only 5 or 6 kilometers away. These 3 small forts are not only the strongest and most advanced in the Wuling West City area, but they are also the closest to Ash Fort, surrounding Ash Fort. Qin Yu paused. Liu Ming nodded and said, go on. If we rank them by distance, the Iron Fist Fort of the Chengmeo Iron Fist Club is undoubtedly the closest. Furthermore, it's also the weakest of the 3 forts overall. Even within the entire 9-fort coalition, the Chengmeo Iron Fist Club wasn't considered strong. Taking down the Iron Fist Club first would undoubtedly be the easiest. Liu Ming nodded, agreeing. But precisely because the Chengmeo Iron Fist Club is the weakest overall, their foundation is also the weakest, so taking them down first wouldn't be very meaningful. What do you mean by not very meaningful? Liu Ming was puzzled. Qin Yu explained with a smile. Boss, you should know that we have a miniature power station in Ash Castle, comprised of several generators. Liu Ming nodded in acknowledgement. The power station is located within the second line of defense. The street lights in Treehouse Square, erected later by Ash Castle technicians, draw their power entirely from the generators in the miniature power station. However, yesterday, all personnel, including those on night watch and those guarding the prisoners, were at the bonfire dinner. Naturally, no one was generating electricity at the power station, so the street lights in Treehouse Square were off. Every night, these street lights illuminated the darkness surrounding Treehouse Square within Ash Castle. Their purpose was to allow the Iron Guard and guards living around Treehouse Square to respond quickly and assemble in the event of an emergency at night. Qin Yu continued, the Chengmeo Iron Fist Association's Iron Fist Fort is similar to our Ash Fort. It also has a macro power station, with a similar number of motors and a similar power output. We looted these motors from the city power station a few months ago. We weren't many people there, so naturally we didn't get much, just these few motors. But some factions made a killing. Hurricane Fort and Sandstorm Fort are among those that snatched the largest number of motors. The scale and power generation capacity of Hurricane Fort and Sandstorm Fort are several times greater than ours. If we can capture them, our power station could expand several times in size, potentially even rivaling the Wuling Republican Association's power station, second only to the Eastern Safe Zone. At this point, Kinyu's eyes flashed with excitement. Furthermore, the Sandstorm Association also has a simple weapons production line. Thermal weapons? Liu Ming asked, frowning. The coalition forces attacking Ash Fort still possessed a significant number of thermal weapons. Even ordinary people who weren't evolvers could still unleash the offensive power of ordinary evolvers with thermal weapons. Yes, boss. To be precise, there are 3 production lines, 1 for rifles, and 2 for bullets. They were all built for Liu Zuan by a retired expert from the provincial arsenal who he picked up. Sandstorm Fort has also become the only gathering place in the entire west of Wuling City that can independently produce hot weapons. This is because he has such a strong appeal that he can gather the 9 forts to form a coalition to attack us. All the hot weapons consumed in the entire west of Wuling City can only be purchased from Sandstorm Fort, except for searching in the wilderness. However, Sandstorm Fort has always rejected our Ashes Castle's request to buy weapons from them. Kinyu's brows flashed with anger when he said this, as if he had suffered a lot of humiliation because of this. Let's not talk about that anymore. But boss, we absolutely must seize those weapons production lines of the Sandstorm Society. They're Sandstorm Castle's most valuable asset, a constant source of cash. And these thermal weapons will not only generate enormous wealth, but also serve as a great means of expanding our influence. After all, the evolved are still a minority. Most survivors and adventurers scavenging for supplies in the wild rely on thermal weapons for self-defense. By providing thermal weapons, we can indirectly control this enormous force. Kinyu narrowed his eyes, a hint of business acumen flashing in his eyes. That makes sense. Please continue. Liu Ming remained silent, but a hint of interest flickered in his eyes, simply motioning for Kinyu to continue. Finally, there's Hurricane Fort. Among the 9 forts in West City, Hurricane Fort isn't the strongest, but it's definitely the richest. Zeduo Heng isn't just good at fighting, he's also an expert at making money, especially war fortunes. He also places great emphasis on the development of support and production professionals. The number and proportion of support professionals in Hurricane Fort are unmatched in the Wuling region. Many man-made special weapons come from Hurricane Fort. If we capture Hurricane Fort, we must not harm those production professionals. The skills they possess in making special weapons will be of great use to us. After all, there are never enough divine weapons, and it's difficult for ordinary combatants to be equipped with divine weapons. Those special weapons are a great choice. But Hurricane Fort is also the farthest from us, and according to the prisoner's confessions, Sigi Fengai's raiding team is currently stationed there. If we attack Hurricane Fort first, we'll be taking the greatest risk. We'll likely face a combined force of at least 2,000 men from Hurricane Fort and Sigi Fengai's raiding team. With our manpower, it's probably going to be difficult to deal with them. Boss, you decide which one to capture first. Chapter 335 Target. Take Iron Fist Fort first. Liu Ming pondered for a moment before declaring his decision. Iron Fist Fort, located near his former residence in Chengmeo, was Liu Ming's first target, whether due to its proximity, a special bond, or the memory of his past feuds with the Chengmeo Iron Fist Club. Of course, the primary reason was that the Iron Fist Club's overall strength was the weakest, and the war against Ash Castle had nearly reached its limit, leaving its remaining forces at their weakest and most vulnerable. If Iron Fist Fort were captured with lightning speed, it would be a significant deterrent to the remaining lurking forces. With Ash Castle having annihilated the coalition forces and its strength intact, it was believed that the many greedy hyenas lurking in the darkness would be intimidated. Ma-Jun and Kinyu were not surprised that Liu Ming had chosen Iron Fist Fort as his primary target. Ma-Jun, in particular, was a veteran who had fought his way from the Chengmeo Group 7 community to establish his own foundation. Naturally, he held a special bond with his former home, not to mention Liu Ming, the leader of this group. Kinyu naturally had no objections. After all, Iron Fist Castle was the weakest of the 3 factions, making it the most suitable target. As any sane person knows, pick the weakest persimmon first. Ma-Jun, go and prepare the battle force. Distribute all the troops from the prisoner of war camp and the demon hunting team among the various Iron Guard teams. Each team should keep a close watch to prevent them from becoming disloyal during the battle. Finally, leave a few behind. Qin, you will be in charge of the remaining forces. The remaining Iron Guard captains and elite troops will mobilize in full force to ensure victory. Finally, Liu Ming gave the final word, signaling the two men to begin pre-battle preparations. After sending them away, Liu Ming turned his attention to his 3 dragon pets. He first glanced at Ji Zhenrong, who was still soundly asleep. Compared to his former size, which was only about the size of a bus or two, Ji Zhenrong now looked even larger. Standing 2 or 3 stories tall, he could be described as a behemoth. His scales, gleaming yellow in the morning light, looked incredibly sturdy. Despite his massive size, his overall form possessed a slender beauty, devoid of the bulky bulk often associated with giant creatures. The only flaw was that, despite Ji Zhenrong's impressive appearance, his aura indicated he was only at the peak of a First Order SS rank, far inferior to the far inferior Kangao blood beast. He then glanced at Ah Fei, who was wrapped around his wrist, and Sumi, who was also sleeping peacefully beside Ji Zhenrong. A hint of apology flashed in his eyes. With the war imminent, it seems I'll have to capture the 3 forts before I can help you quickly complete your evolution to a second order creature, Liu Ming muttered. While none of his 3 dragon pets had evolved to the 2nd level, which was undoubtedly a drawback, the most urgent priority wasn't evolving them, but reaping the fruits of victory. All the resources of the 3 small forts had to be seized as soon as possible. This war was not only a disaster for Ash Castle, but also an opportunity for its rise. Beyond anything else, the tens of thousands of people in the 3 forts represented a tremendous asset. The hidden danger of disregarding human life at the beginning of the catastrophe had finally erupted at this stage. Population represented not only increased food consumption but also productivity. Power plants needed workers, factories and workshops needed workers, and raising livestock and cultivating crops required even more. With nearly half of Wuling's population already relocated to the military-controlled Eastern Safe Zone, the only way to gain population was to recruit from other settlements, and the already devastated 3 forts were undoubtedly the best targets. Once Ash Castle gained these tens of thousands of people, Liu Ming's ideas could begin to materialize. In the future, it might be possible to expand Ash Castle's size and overall strength to surpass that of the Wuling Coexistence Association. The 3 forts hold immense influence within the survivor settlements in Wuling City's West City. If they were taken, Ash Castle would undoubtedly become the most powerful force in the area. The immense benefits this influence brings are undeniable. Furthermore, the Sandstorm Society's 3 weapons production lines are a resource Liu Ming covets. Currently, the weapons used by the various survivor settlements and small forts largely originate from the Wuling Coexistence Society. The Coexistence Society operates a small military factory with over 10 production lines for various weapons and ammunition, far more advanced than those of the Sandstorm Society. Historically, the Coexistence Society, the precursor to the Demon Hunters, briefly joined the military and political forces, but ultimately became independent. The Demon Hunters were founded during this period, and the Coexistence Society is the primary force behind the Demon Hunters. The Demon Hunters President, Frost Knight Yi King, and Vice President, Dragonblade Mu Kang, 2 former leaders of the Coexistence Society, are also among the 16 great leaders of Wuling. The other 3 honorary vice presidents were leaders of several elite demon hunting corps, including Sandstorm's Ruzan. The Demon Hunting Guild boasted 5 members of the 16th realm, nearly equal to the 6 on the military and political side. With Sandstorm Swordmaster Uzwan's demise by Liu Ming, the Demon Hunting Guild likely lost another member of the 16th realm. Hurricane Castle's Feng Zhu also met his end at Liu Ming's hands. Even after 10 years, thermal weapons haven't been completely eliminated, remaining the most lethal weapon wielded by ordinary people. Before humans reached the 2nd stage of evolution, even small caliber thermal weapons posed a certain threat. After all, human flesh and blood are no match for monsters. Even S-level creatures possess scales, cuticles, and Teflon leather as tough as steel. Only after breaking the 2nd divine gene chain and evolving to the post-2nd stage of elemental mastery can humans, relying on their body's natural reaction mechanisms, to form a barrier of primordial energy, to withstand the attacks of small caliber thermal weapons. Of course, human evolutionists can still defeat monsters with physical strength exceeding that of steel. This is because the monster's scales and cuticles may offer exceptional defense against physical attacks, but they aren't necessarily resistant to energy attacks. For example, his own dragon pets, the SS level Neo and Dragon Salamander, the SSS level Purple Flametail Cat, and the SSS level Winged Claw Dragon Snake Trio, or some powerful SSS level monsters, may rival Liu Ming in strength, but this doesn't necessarily mean they possess tier 2 combat power. Combat power is a comprehensive concept, not a single attribute. For example, remember the group of mutant alligator snapping turtles known for their defense in Jinshitan, a suburb of Wuling City. Not counting the tier 2 leader, even the other tier 1s level and above mutant alligator snapping turtles possess tier 2 defense and strength. However, this doesn't necessarily mean they possess tier 2 combat power, they simply possess a hard shell that passively withstands blows. While they may be resistant, they ultimately suffer a crushing defeat. Chapter 336 War Preparation, Part 1. If possible, Liu Ming even wanted to seize the weapons production line held by the Coexistence Society. Hot weapons would significantly enhance the strength of the rank and file soldiers, both now and in the coming years. However, these actions could not be rushed. Historically, the Wuling Coexistence Society, the predecessor of the Demon Hunters, faced a fierce disagreement when it decided to join the military and political leadership over the Coexistence Society's military factory. The military and political leadership insisted that the Coexistence Society's factories be merged with the military factories in the safe zone, but the Coexistence Society's leadership flatly rejected this unreasonable clause. However, under repeated pressure from the military and political leadership, the Coexistence Society was ultimately forced to divest the factory's weapons and ammunition production lines and sell them off to various settlements in the Wuling region. That would be the perfect opportunity for him to take action. The Coexistence Society's military factory was far superior to the Sandstorm Society's rudimentary production lines. It was a vital resource that the military and political leadership could not relinquish, and it even contained weapons production technology that they themselves did not possess. By this time, the entire Ash Castle had been awakened by the clamor. Led by the various internal affairs stewards and internal affairs directors, the ordinary survivors of Ash Castle began their post-war reconstruction and repair work in an orderly manner. Despite working on an empty stomach since early morning, everyone remained in high spirits. After all, the food from the previous night's feast was still plentiful, and few felt hungry. Internal affairs stewards and internal affairs directors were unique positions within Ash Castle, distinct from ordinary survivors. According to the 5-category personnel classification system established by Liu Ming, they belonged to the 3rd and 2nd tiers of special personnel, respectively. They were grassroots management personnel. Ash Castle had undergone tremendous changes compared to just over 6 months ago. Apart from other factors, the number of survivors gathered had grown from a few thousand to over 10,000. A gathering of over 10,000 people was considered a significant survivor base, even within the entire Wuling region. An effective management system was essential, otherwise the coexistence of so many people would inevitably lead to chaos. Internal affairs deacons and internal affairs directors are specialized professionals, distinct from external combat personnel, responsible for managing the survivors of Ashford. Most of them aren't evolved professionals, but they possess extensive management experience. They all come under the direct supervision of Internal Affairs Director Kinyu, receiving orders from him. The survivors of Ashford are divided into multiple work and residential areas, based on their roles and residences. Each work and residential area is managed by an Internal Affairs Director and several Internal Affairs Deacons. The entire Ashford's operational model and zoning are divided into the core zone within the Ash Wall, the central zone outside the Ash Wall and adjacent to the core zone, and the outer zone at the outermost edge. The core zone is where core personnel operate. Besides providing housing for combat personnel, the central zone also serves as Ashford's industrial zone. Ashford's few remaining factories are located in the central zone, with the power plant and food processing plant being of primary importance. The power plant provides electricity for Ashford's essential equipment, while the food processing plant transforms harvested grains and meat into food for easy storage. After all, in this era, cooking for oneself was undoubtedly a luxury for most survivors. The difficulty in obtaining fuel meant that everyone was limited to a uniform food ration. The only people capable of using heat to cook their own food, aside from those with specialized fire-related professions, were the middle and upper echelons of the settlement, those with sufficient wealth to truly enjoy life if, of course, being able to cook one's own food could truly be considered living. Besides churning out the dry pancake-like rations daily, the food processing plant also processed increasingly elusive meats into long-lasting jerky, as well as produced high-end foods for the settlement's middle and upper echelons. This small food processing plant alone employed nearly 1,000 people in Ash Castle. After all, the entire food processing plant relied entirely on manual labor, devoid of machinery, resulting in low efficiency and a significant loss of labor. Compared to the meat processing plant, the power plant accommodated far fewer workers. The entire plant consisted of only a few motors, and the technology used was still primitive thermal generators. Coal was constantly fed into the furnace to generate heat and generate electricity. Furthermore, few people in Ashford understood motor power generation technology, so the power plant had very few workers, primarily laborers, with few technicians. Of course, the remaining personnel were not idle either. Following Liu Ming's established rule, Ashford would never keep a single idler, and the remaining survivors were assigned to various positions. From logistics support for the search teams to street sweeping, medical care, and stone collection for building construction, wherever labor was needed, they were filled. With the exception of young children, every survivor in Ashford became a cog in this vast survival machine, constantly turning. Before the shadow of war enveloped Ashford, the daily routine of ordinary survivors consisted of walking from the outer residential areas to the central gates, entering the various factories or search teams to work, earning their daily rations. At night, they returned to the settlement to rest. Aside from a few rare monster attacks on the settlement, life was almost uneventful, almost forgetting the apocalypse still raging outside the city walls. While the ordinary survivors were organized and began clearing the ruins and preparing for reconstruction, the cavalry began to gather all combatants. Ash Castle had been devastated by the war, and the remaining Iron Guards numbered just over 1,000. Despite the loss of over half, the top fighters remained intact. There were 395 evolved classes, specializing in combat, nearing human limits, and 687 guardsmen, capable of fighting against the lowest monsters. Most of the weapons these guards had used in previous battles were still Ash Castle's homemade weapons, specifically modified by support classes for special abilities. Attributed weapons are weapons imbued with one or more special properties. These properties might include sharpness, which allows ordinary steel knives to cut through stone, toughness, which reduces the wielder's sense of pain and enhances combat effectiveness, or special properties like strength and agility, which increase the wielder's strength and speed. These weapons are naturally far superior to ordinary cold weapons. Over 1,000 attributed weapons have been crafted over the past 6 months by 2 professionals in Ash Castle with weapon making and modification abilities. Their impact on Ash Castle's overall strength is undoubtedly far greater than that of 2 ordinary evolved professionals, which is why Kinyu is so concerned about the special professionals with manufacturing abilities in Hurricane Castle. However, their attributed weapons have now been replaced with divinely gifted weapons. These attributed weapons have been distributed to prisoners of war, and the prisoners' divinely gifted items have been collected and distributed to the Ash Castle warriors. This war not only caused Ash Castle heavy losses, but also brought astonishing gains. At least now, not only the Iron Guard, but even the garrison guards each possessed at least one divinely blessed weapon. Seeing the excited faces of those holding the once unreachable divinely blessed weapons before him, Marjan felt a surge of confidence. Although the outcome of this battle remained uncertain, he felt more confident about taking the initiative than he had previously been on the defensive. He could only console himself with the knowledge that the boss was certain of his victory. Standing before the 1,000 men, the armored officer cleared his throat and loudly announced the purpose of the assembly. The coalition forces of Hurricane Fort, Sandstorm Society, and Chengmeo Iron Fist Society have been defeated by us, and their leaders have all died on the territory of our Ash Fort, at the hands of our leader, Liu Ming. This is the price they paid for provoking the war. Looking at the excited faces of the fighters in front of him, Marjan nodded with satisfaction, as if he was satisfied with the excitement he had aroused in them with just a few words. Then he said in a higher voice, Leader Liu Ming has decided to lead everyone to launch a war of revenge against the remaining forces of the three forts, striving to annihilate them in one fell swoop and seize all their resources, wealth and population to strengthen ourselves. This battle is bound to encounter obstructions from many other forces. We must win the victory in one battle. We must not let the remaining soldiers of the three forts catch their breath, and we must not give them time to collude with other forces. Chapter 337 War Preparation, Part 2. Boom. With a resounding roar like thunder, the heavy steel gate of the armory was flung open by the bare hands of a sturdy bold warrior, and the door landed heavily on the ground. A dense mass of figures surged before the gates, hundreds, perhaps even thousands, gathering in front of them. Among the crowd were excited faces, all bearing a variety of weapons. Their demeanor was fierce, and at this moment, they all appeared to be visibly excited and impatient. The armory, one of the most heavily guarded areas of Ashfort, contained countless rare items, but it had never been fully accessible to everyone. Even during the crucial moment of the Nine Fortress invasion, the armory's inventory remained unemptied, distributing it to the warriors to enhance their combat effectiveness. The various high-level items, weapons, and armor within were strictly redeemable based on points. Even in the face of war, strict redemption rules were adhered to, and no unconditional distribution was permitted. Of course, deeper considerations were also at play. However, during wartime, the exchange requirements for various divinely favored items were reduced, but for many Ashford warriors, even these discounted prices were still out of reach. The battle is imminent. According to the special instructions the Commander-in-Chief just gave me, all weapons in stock will be distributed to all soldiers, Marjan declared loudly. He and Gong Weeksin served as Vice Commanders-in-Chief of Ash Castle, and the position of Commander-in-Chief had remained vacant. When he uttered the word Commander-in-Chief, everyone immediately understood who he was referring to. Really? Hahaha, I can upgrade my arsenal too. You stingy guy. As soon as he finished speaking, the thousands of Ash Castle warriors gathered in front of the armory erupted in excitement. Soon, several heavily armored trucks slowly emerged from the armory. Thanks to the armorer's exceptionally high roof, otherwise, these trucks, at least 4 meters high, would have been unable to enter or exit. The reason these trucks were parked in the armory was because, even at the most critical moment, the armory's weapons and equipment were not distributed to all soldiers. The worst case scenario initially envisioned by the top decision makers at Ashfort was that, if Ashfort fell, the remaining Ashfort members, led by Gong Ruohan, would evacuate the Wuling region along with all the divinely blessed items from the armory. So, when Marjan led his men into the armory to remove the weapons and equipment, they were already crated and loaded onto trucks. These trucks were parked inside, ready to transport the remaining members should Ashfort be breached. The Ashfort leadership knew the odds of victory against the three forts were pitifully low. It could even be said that this was a battle they knew they would lose, so they naturally didn't want to expose all their resources and have them taken as spoils. With this preserved foundation, with the leader and the remaining Ashfort members, they could easily rebuild an Ashfort elsewhere. However, Liu Ming's powerful return crushed the allied forces of the three forts, and these plans were dashed. As crates of stored weapons and equipment were unloaded from the trucks, the excitement in the crowd reached a fever pitch. All the loot captured during the three-fort war, plus the divine gifts gained from the sacrifices offered at the four-color altar over the past 6 months, was unloaded, leaving Marjan with a pang of pain. Fortunately, Kinyu wasn't there, otherwise he would have vomited blood seeing his hard-earned fortune suddenly depleted. Despite occupying one of the few four-color altars in the Wuling region, Ash Castle's wealth might not be as abundant as Hurricane Castle and Sandstorm. Since Liu Ming's departure, Ash Castle has been developing slowly. Compared to other factions that have undergone drastic reforms and development, Ash Castle's leader is gone. Gong Weeksin, the strongest figure, lacks ambition, and Marjan, who barely has enough experience to keep everyone in check, lacks strength. Consequently, for a long time after Liu Ming's disappearance, Ash Castle lacked a leader to support its operations. Consequently, internal unrest even arose, putting development at risk. Therefore, their reserve of offerings was nowhere near what other smaller 4th level forces could offer, and naturally, their divinely blessed weaponry and equipment were also inferior. However, while their numbers couldn't match those of the larger Hurricane Fort and Sandstorm Guild, their quality far surpassed them. The highest level altars occupied by Hurricane Fort and Sandstorm Guild were barely larger than the sacrificial capacity of the 4-color altar. Boxes of weapons and equipment were opened, revealing a diverse array of swords, armor, firearms, special items, potions, mysterious cards, scrolls, and other divinely blessed items. We will now begin distributing equipment, based on your level and military achievements, Marjan said, his heart clenched as he observed the excited expressions of the crowd. While everyone else was busily upgrading their weapons, Liu Ming had already entered the altar hall, converted from the former train station ticket hall. Sacrifice. Bands of light, gray, white, red, and blue, emerged from the altar, swelling around it like a halo. A female figure emerged from the light. Liu Ming, long time no see. A cold voice rang out. Liu Ming was slightly startled when the altar priest called out his name, but then his expression returned to normal. He said, "It seems your energy level has also increased significantly over the past 6 months. Energy level is a general term for various forms and levels of life, and it's not inappropriate to use it to describe the priests born from the altar. What's your purpose? I don't seem to see any offerings." The priest continued with a chuckle. "How much divine grace have I accumulated from my divine favor over the past 6 months?" This was Liu Ming's intention in coming to the altar. Although he had no offerings, the divine favor granted by his status as altar master must have accumulated to a considerable amount after 6 months. Upon his return, Liu Ming's first priority was to inspect the altar. After all, the 4-color altar was his trump card for his rise to power, and he would not allow anyone else to tamper with it. Fortunately, he still held the highest divine favor at this 4-color altar, meaning he remained the master of the altar. This was likely due to the fact that before his departure, he personally conducted every large-scale sacrifice. Otherwise, after 6 months, the position of altar master would have long since passed. A lot. After a moment's silence, the priest spoke, as if sensing the amount of divine grace Liu Ming was supposed to allocate. A lot. Liu Ming was secretly delighted. For the altar priest to say the word a lot, he feared the accumulated divine grace must be quite significant. This way, perhaps his goal could be achieved. I remember the altar master being able to use the divine grace allocated by his favor to designate an already existing divine grace item? Liu Ming asked. He had heard such rumors before. Sure enough, the priest nodded slightly in agreement. Excellent. I need evolutionary divine grace ranging from level 1S to level 1 SSS. Is that enough? Liu Ming asked. His own energy level had already reached level 1A. If he could improve further, his strength would naturally increase significantly. Enough, with some left over. What if we add level 2F? Liu Ming continued. Way too little, the priest said, shaking his head like a rattle, indicating it was insufficient. Liu Ming wasn't surprised by this. After all, the gap between level 1 and level 2 wasn't so easy to bridge, otherwise there wouldn't be only 2 level 2 professionals in the entire Ash Castle. However, being able to progress all the way to SSS level already satisfied him. He expected to face many obstacles in his quest to destroy the 3 castles, so it was wise to be prepared. Lu Zuan alone had practically driven him out of his territory, proving that his strength wasn't invincible in Wuling. However, Liu Ming wasn't discouraged. After all, his true energy level was only A level. If he had reached level 2, it was doubtful whether Lu Zuan could last more than 3 minutes. Furthermore, his telekinesis was far from fully developed. He had only mastered one Dizeng secret technique, an earth-based technique that Lu Zuan was unable to counter. If he could develop a variety of telekinetic attacks and combine them, his strength would likely surge. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338, Evolution and the New Abilities of the Furnace. The altar hall of Ash Castle shone with a brilliant light of grey, white, red, and blue. Bands of 4-colored light swirled around the altar, and above it like a halo, completely immersing Liu Ming in a dazzling sea of light. The altar's actual area was only a few meters in diameter, but when the sacrifice began, a sea of light emerged. Within the altar's sea of light, it felt as if one were transported to another vast world, with no glimpse of the sky. The pillars of light formed by the bands of light were so powerful that even the walls couldn't completely block them. The 4-colored beams burst through the walls and soared into the sky. The 4-colored glow illuminated the still dim morning of Ash Castle, illuminating the surroundings like a blazing fire. Everyone was accustomed to these sudden pillars of light appearing in the altar hall. Everyone knew what they signified. Whenever a pillar of light appeared, it simply meant another sacrifice had begun. Standing in the center of the sea of light, Liu Ming faced the priest. The altar priestess, her body composed of energy, raised her flawless moonlit hand gently, pointing the staff in her hand toward the void before her. The staff struck the calm surface of a well, shattering it. Ripples of light spread across the void. Then, rays of light converged into white ribbons, shooting out from the void. Countless divine radiances swooped down before the priestess, then abruptly stopped. Countless white rays converged between the priestess and Liu Ming, rapidly entwining and tangling like silk threads. 3 dazzling cocoons of light appeared at lightning speed. Faint golden lines were faintly visible on the cocoons, forming mysterious symbols reminiscent of legendary divine patterns. Liu Ming's eyes flickered with joy as he gazed at the 3 cocoons. For most of the past 6 months in this alternate time and space, the incredibly slow progress of his energy level had always been a drawback. Only on Earth could his energy level continuously leap forward through the evolutionary divine grace granted through altar sacrifices. Actually, if one disregarded the dreamlike 10 years in his memory, he seemed to have never truly utilized the evolutionary divine grace in the 6 months since the apocalypse. He had always relied on the cultivation of his primal ki to propel his energy level. Recalling the miraculous effects of the evolutionary divine grace, compared to his own painstaking cultivation, the difference was a world of difference. 3 light cocoons lined up before Liu Ming, suspended in midair by an invisible force. Looking at the pale golden lines on the white cocoons, Liu Ming quickly distinguished the 3. Not only did the amount of evolutionary energy contained within each cocoon vary, but the pale golden lines also showed that higher level evolutionary divine grace cocoons had more complex and dense patterns. The pale golden lines on the SSS level evolutionary divine grace were the most dense, covering nearly every part of the cocoon, ultimately forming a complete pattern that resembled an intertwined genetic chain. The mysterious pale golden patterns on the other 2 cocoons appeared somewhat fragmented. Liu Ming didn't bother taking the cocoons out to absorb them. His strength far surpassed that of ordinary 2nd level evolvers. He only needed to absorb and convert large amounts of evolutionary energy to naturally complete his evolution. He naturally didn't need the extreme caution other evolvers had to exercise each time they used evolutionary divine grace, lest they lose control of the vast amount of energy and suffer damage from the impact. With his strength and mastery of energy, he could perfectly control evolutionary energy, which was no more than the first SSS level. With this in mind, he reached out and grabbed the first cocoon, representing the S-level evolutionary divine grace. His current energy level was A level, making the use of S-level evolutionary divine grace more appropriate. Even if his strength far exceeded his current energy level, absorbing evolutionary divine grace required a gradual and steady process. After the light cocoon was in his hand, its radiance subsided, transforming into an oval white crystal about the size of 2 fists, shimmering with a pale golden sheen. This was the true form of the evolution divine grace. Simply breaking the outer shell would allow him to absorb the evolutionary energy contained within. With a flick of his finger, Liu Ming easily shattered the crystal shell of the evolution divine grace. A surge of energy, brimming with life force, gushed out from the shattered area. Liu Ming immediately mobilized his mental power to tightly encircle the rift, preventing the escape of the evolutionary energy. He then grasped the evolution divine grace tightly in his hand, his mental power like an invisible hand, each time channeling a vast amount of evolutionary energy into his body. Boom. As each stream of evolutionary energy was rapidly absorbed, a sound resounded through Liu Ming's body, like the breaking of invisible shackles. Liu Ming twisted his limbs, feeling the surge of power coursing through his bones, and a smile spread across his face. He could sense the perfect completion of his evolution, his natural progression from air level to S level, a natural force brewing within him. His entire primordial energy, as if cleansed, underwent a transformation. With just a little more practice, his primordial energy should be able to surpass A level. Through the baptism of the evolutionary divine grace, the essence of his primordial energy had already undergone an S-level transformation. All that was lacking was quantity. While others cultivate through quantitative change to qualitative transformation, Liu Ming's evolution, achieved through the evolutionary divine grace, required qualitative change before the accumulation of quantitative change. The former was extremely difficult, the latter quite easy. He reached out to the second cocoon of light, which exploded within him with a bang, sending power surging through him like a tide. Then came the third cocoon of light. As the energy of the third cocoon began to impact Liu Ming's entire body, a white light emerged from his form. The King Ming primordial energy, as if infused with spirituality, swam around him like fish. Countless streams of Ajna the primordial key converged into a powerful aura, and the grey-black transparent flames burning within them deepened in color. If Liu Ming had previously appeared to possess immense combat power, yet his appearance betrayed no trace of his brilliance, now, after 3 consecutive evolutions, Liu Ming, having successfully reached the SSS level, exuded a profound aura from his appearance alone. The convergence of Ajna the primordial key and the heat waves created by the ash-colored flames burning within his primordial key pushed his aura to a new peak. What surprised Liu Ming most wasn't the changes in his energy level or primordial key, those were to be expected. Energy levels not only fuel evolution, but evolution also drives qualitative changes within them. What surprised him most was a change he hadn't anticipated. His heart, under the impact of the 3 evolutionary energies, had undergone a transformation. The blood vessels within his volcanic heart were actually undergoing a transformation resembling crystallization, and the blood flowing through them soared in temperature, like streams of molten lava. The blood vessels connected to the heart, like the grooves flowing through molten lava in a volcano, took on a crystalline texture. Lava. Liu Ming whispered, channeling the new energy spawned from the volcanic furnace into his palm. Gurgling. Like lava overflowing from a volcano's crater, streams of crimson molten lava flowed from his palm. Molten lava? Liu Ming was a little disappointed. The lava heart had once given him this ability, and if it still existed now, it would be nothing more than a rehash. The next moment, his expression froze, a flash of shock in his eyes, as if he had witnessed something unbelievable. What is this? The molten lava, that continuously flowed from his palm, like molten iron leaving a scorching blast furnace, quickly solidified as it dripped onto the ground. A moment later, it transformed into irregular clusters of crimson crystals. However, even after solidifying into crystals, it continued to radiate heat. Liu Ming's mental power shifted, and a crimson crystal flew into his palm. The shock intensified as he felt it. The surface temperature of the crimson crystal reached over 1000 degrees Celsius, and the core was likely even hotter. Furthermore, the crimson crystal, like a heat source, continuously radiated heat in all directions. After radiating heat for several minutes, the energy contained within remained virtually unchanged. This sparked a wave of speculation in Liu Ming. While the specific function of this crystal was still unknown, the constant heat it emitted could be a valuable energy source. All he had to pay was a mere insignificant amount of yuan qi. After nodding to the priest, Liu Ming stepped out of the altar circle of light and descended. His eyes narrowed slightly as he gazed at the dust-covered gargoyle's lair in a corner of the altar hall. Ever since he left, the gargoyle and its lair, which he alone controlled, seemed paralyzed. Now was the perfect time to restart them. However, it seemed that crafting a high-level gargoyle required specialized materials. Liu Ming squeezed the scorching, yet incapable of burning himself, crystal in his hand. His eyes lit up. Could this also be considered a special material? Perhaps. Chapter 339 The Birth of the Cannon Fodder Army. looking at the massive black-grey egg-shaped structure standing motionless in a corner of the hall. The outer walls of the oval nest were riddled with pits, appearing incredibly rough. Yet, Liu Ming felt an indescribable sense of familiarity. However, if an ordinary person stood before it, they would feel nothing but the illusion of standing on the edge of an abyss. The gargoyle nest was merely a low-level troop nest, with a grey 7-star energy level. This meant that the upper limit of the troop level it could produce was only a first tier S grade. However, even a first tier S grade was considered cutting-edge combat power at this time. In the entire Ash Castle, the number of S grade evolutionists, even including support professionals, before the casualties of this war, was no more than 100. However, the gargoyle nest could mass produce S grade evolutionists. The only cost was materials and energy cores. While still costly, it provided a more efficient and stable channel for increasing combat power than the uncertainties of cultivating evolutionists. Liu Ming held sole control of the gargoyle lair. As the lair's master, both the lair and the gargoyles it created obeyed his command. Therefore, after his departure, the gargoyle lair's effectiveness declined to a minimum. The gargoyles that had already been created became true stone statues, huddled motionless against the lair's thick walls and ceiling for 6 months, like statues guarding the lair. Liu Ming attempted to activate his subordinates, and surprisingly, the gargoyles immediately shook off the dust and moved. Looks like the energy hasn't run out yet. At his command, a dozen regular gargoyles, along with gargoyle guards and soldiers, converged on him. Liu Ming felt their power cores, and found they still had more than half their energy remaining. If memory serves, a power core containing 1 unit of raw stone energy lasts several years, so 6 months wouldn't be enough to deplete it. 6 months of inactivity had allowed them to retain a significant portion of their energy. Despite Liu Ming's current level of strength, the assistance these F&D rank gargoyles could provide him was minimal. However, a special feeling welled up in his heart as he watched his first batch of puppet soldiers, over a dozen gargoyles remaining intact, after over 6 months remaining intact. However, this wave of emotion vanished in an instant. He placed his hand on the outer wall of the gargoyle nest. A familiar, cold consciousness sent a message. "Master, shall we create gargoyles?" The words are exactly the same as before. Liu Ming chuckled and shook his head. The intelligence of such low-level troop nests was indeed very low. He remembered the tone being almost identical to when he first activated the gargoyle nest, not even a word different. Liu Ming pressed the crimson crystal against the nest's outer wall and asked, "What effect does this material have on creating gargoyles?" The nest's cratered outer wall suddenly cracked, swallowing the crimson crystal. The sound of crimson crystals being ground into dust emanated from the outer walls of the nest. After Liu Ming waited for a moment, his cold, emotionless consciousness finally relayed another message. "Master, after testing and detection, this is a special crystal material containing fire energy. It can be used to create specialized gargoyle units. If it can be supplied in large quantities, it can completely replace magic crystals." Upon hearing this, Liu Ming's expression brightened, a hint of uncontrollable joy evident. Mass production? The very words filled him with a surge of excitement. Before he left, why had the gargoyles' numbers been limited, and they had been used only as a surprise attack? Ultimately, it was because the magic crystals, the raw stones that served as the core energy source, were extremely scarce. He hadn't expected the new power of his volcanic furnace heart to allow for mass production of the gargoyle's energy core. This had practically broken through the biggest bottleneck facing mass production. However, it was too early to predict the final outcome. The number of crimson crystals required to create a single gargoyle still needed to be determined. If a vast quantity of crimson crystals was required to create a single gargoyle, then this substitution was unrealistic. After all, there was a limit to the amount of crimson crystals he could produce daily, as they consumed his own vital energy. He handed all the newly condensed crimson crystals to the gargoyles for them to swallow. He then asked the nest's intelligent spirit, "Are these enough materials for a single gargoyle's power core?" A crackling sound emanated from within the nest, as if the crimson crystals were being ground by gears. 3 regular gargoyles. What? Liu Ming's eyes flashed. After all, these crimson crystals were merely a casual experiment with the power of his newly spawned furnace. consuming less than 1% of his vital energy. Yet, they were more than enough to power 3 gargoyles. While these were only the most common regular gargoyles, don't forget that even regular gargoyles were monsters capable of easily slaughtering ordinary people. He could almost see the army of gargoyles, cannon fodder, overwhelm the enemy. A moment later, the Ashford guards, following Liu Ming's instructions, carried large quantities of stone and monster flesh into the altar hall. When the stone and flesh piled up behind Liu Ming into a mountain larger than the gargoyle's lair, he signaled that enough was enough and told everyone to leave. Build gargoyle soldiers. For this war against the 3 forts, he needed a large number of cannon fodder. Gargoyles, with their tough skin and easy production, naturally became the first choice for this cannon fodder, followed by prisoners of war. Of course, even for cannon fodder, the lowest level regular gargoyles were no longer sufficient. After all, against a master like Ruzan, whose powerful area of effect attacks could easily destroy a large number of regular gargoyles with a single blow, he was now focused on building the strongest gargoyles the lair could currently produce: gargoyle soldiers. The production of a gargoyle soldier consumes approximately 5 times as much crimson crystal as a regular gargoyle. The roar of crushing material echoed continuously from the gargoyle's lair, and one flying gargoyle after another emerged from it. Their cold, hard bodies, the flashing cold blades and sharp teeth, and the circular stone shield at the end of their left arm, completely connected to their bodies, all gave them a formidable appearance. The gargoyle soldiers still retained a lingering warmth, the warmth coming from the flesh and blood of the monsters. The meat stored in Ash Castle consisted primarily of edible monster flesh, a staple of Ash Castle's survival rations. Liu Ming naturally had no desire to use this material. The flesh and blood used to create the gargoyles came from the monsters he hunted. With his current strength, hunting down monsters below level 2 was a piece of cake. The hall was filled with more and more gargoyle soldiers. These monsters, roughly the size of a strong man, quickly filled the hall, forcing Liu Ming to let them fly to the walls and rooftops. As the number of gargoyles increased, Liu Ming was still able to control them with ease, without feeling the slightest bit of effort. With the massive supply of crimson crystals and various materials, the number of gargoyle soldiers has exceeded 100. His previous telekinesis naturally could not control such a large number of gargoyle cannon fodder, but Liu Ming, who possessed a vast telekinesis, could control an army with a geometric increase in number. The monster nest was constantly overloaded to produce cannon fodder. When all the materials were exhausted, he had produced no less than 200 gargoyles of various shapes. As the stone and flesh and blood were exhausted, only a pile of crimson crystals that Liu Ming had produced in excess remained. The wisdom of the gargoyle nest also sent new information. Based on the characteristics of the new material, the nest has discovered that it can produce a special new type of gargoyle. Do you want to make it? Chapter 340 Lava Gargoyle. Liu Ming couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, a hint of delight in his eyes. He had never created a special gargoyle beyond the 3 types of regular gargoyles: gargoyle guards and gargoyle soldiers. And this new gargoyle, with its special materials, predicted its power and combat effectiveness to be at least as high as that of the gargoyle soldiers. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be worthy of the term special. Craft it. Please provide the materials: 30 units of crimson crystal, 10 tons of stone, and 1 ton of flesh and blood. As usual, besides the power core, other materials were acquired. Liu Ming immediately poured in a full 30 units of crimson crystal and various materials. Each unit of crimson crystal was roughly the size of a palm. Assuming that each unit of crimson crystal provided the power core for a regular gargoyle, these 30 units of materials would be the main materials needed for 30 regular gargoyles and 6 gargoyle soldiers. This consumption was quite substantial. Amidst the crackling sound of grinding, the outer wall of the gargoyle's lair occasionally opened up, releasing waves of searing heat. Clearly, the heat inherent in the special material of the crimson crystal was too intense for the nest to withstand directly, requiring the heat to be dissipated in order to cool down. These gusts of air were significantly hotter than boiling water, and if they struck an ordinary person's face, they would instantly scald skin and cause blisters. However, these heat waves were nothing to Liu Ming. Despite the pyrotechnic power of his volcanic furnace heart and his enhanced resistance to the intense heat after his transformation, his physical fitness and resistance, comparable to that of a second-tier veteran warrior, allowed him to ignore the intense heat waves. He was staring intently at the gargoyle nest. He could sense that a powerful monster unit was gestating within. While this power was only relative, at least not particularly for him, it was incredibly powerful for ordinary people, even for evolved ones, and truly formidable. The creation and incubation time for this new gargoyle unit was significantly longer than that for the other 3 types of gargoyles. After nearly 10 minutes, the piercing roar within the lair finally subsided. With a crash, a gaping hole nearly 2 meters high opened up in the outer wall of the lair, and a hideous head emerged from the breach. Its red face and fangs were even more hideous and terrifying than a demon. It was a terrifying, demonic head, its head covered in fiery red rock fragments like armor, tightly wrapped around the skull. Between the crimson fragments, flowed a dark red liquid as hot as magma, and from its nostrils, sweltering steam erupted at an alarming temperature. The monster's eyes glowed red like molten lava, and its head, as if pieced together from molten lava, looked shattered and hideous, yet seamlessly solid. Then, following closely behind the head, the monster's massive burly body forced its way through the cracks in the gargoyle's lair. This was a unique gargoyle, over 2 meters tall, with a massive and ferocious build. Its body, seemingly composed of molten lava, its sharp arm blades, and the lava blocks clinging to its body like armor, imbued it with a powerful presence, all betraying the monster's might and terror. Excellent, excellent. The gargoyle, seemingly composed of lava, stood motionless before Liu Ming. He could sense that with a single thought, he could activate this humanoid weapon, swinging it into a killing blow. His 2 excellent words clearly demonstrated his satisfaction with this humanoid weapon. Top C class. This unique gargoyle, with a power core 6 times that of an E-class gargoyle soldier, had reached a remarkable C-class power level, not far from B-class. A C-class peak evolutionary level would make them considered the backbone of the entire Ash Castle. Their numbers before the battle were undoubtedly no more than 400, and now they were likely fewer than 300. Bang! Liu Ming casually struck the special gargoyle with his fists and feet. The gargoyle merely staggered, its chest armor cracking slightly, but sustaining no significant damage. A hint of surprise crossed Liu Ming's eyes. His punch, though not at full strength, perhaps less than 20% or 30%, was no less powerful than a full strength attack from an A-rank power class. Yet, even with that blow, the gargoyle's chest armor shattered. This suggests that a top tier C rank special gargoyle possesses defense comparable to that of an A rank. With my remaining energy, I can probably create another 900 crimson crystals. If I have enough ordinary materials, I can create another 30 special gargoyles from these crimson crystals. While their offensive power isn't strong, 30 special gargoyles with A rank defense would definitely be a useful surprise attack in a war, particularly effective at drawing fire and forcing through enemy lines. With this in mind, Liu Ming became deeply interested in creating special gargoyles. Leaving the altar hall, Liu Ming gave the order, and a vast amount of materials were rapidly carried into the hall. The survivors of Ashford who had come to carry the materials were all shocked by the densely packed gargoyles. Gargoyles were not uncommon in Ashford, most of them had seen them before, but seeing them in such large numbers was unprecedented. They naturally guessed that this was Liu Ming's work, as the last time they entered the altar hall, there weren't so many. Liu Ming simply instructed them to pile up the materials as before, and send them on their way. The survivors, who had served as transporters for several times, were filled with confusion, but didn't dare to ask any questions, filing out one by one. As each piece of material was dropped into the gargoyle's lair, the gargoyles began to work like a massive machine. One by one, hideous, unique gargoyles emerged from the lair and approached Liu Ming. When 10 enormous special gargoyles emerged from their lair and approached him, he suddenly realized that this special type of gargoyle didn't seem to have a name. Why not name it yourself? It's covered in armor as hard as molten lava, and its body is as fiery as flowing molten lava. Let's call it the lava gargoyle. As soon as the words left his mouth, a cold, emotionless voice echoed from the lair. Naming successful. Name the new gargoyle the lava gargoyle. The continuous appearance of 2-meter-tall lava gargoyles, a full head taller than Liu Ming, finally exhausted the materials and the crimson crystals Liu Ming had expended his energy to create. Looking around at the hundreds of gargoyles, Liu Ming shouted with great enthusiasm, "Let's go." As each gargoyle emerged from the sacrificial hall's gates and into view, the workers outside the altar hall were utterly stunned, exclaiming in surprise, "Are these gargoyles? These monsters seem to be under the control of boss Liu Ming. Those fiery red gargoyles seem like something I've never seen before, and they seem so much more powerful than the others." Each gargoyle followed closely on the ground, or flapped its wings, soaring through the air. P.S. Thank you to my brother, Chyan Haoiu, for your generous support. I'm adding an extra chapter today to show my appreciation. I'm also grateful to my brothers, including Yaoji Nan Nan Jingsheng, Giteng, Xianshan Xiashan, LLK, Lucky, Zeng, Yu, KG Ancho, Fang Jejejej, Assassin Xingxiao, Sui Xanao, Tranquil Prosperity, Colorful White and Black, Book Friend 2017040215112958. Ashu Zioi, Tal Rinsheng, Fallen Blood Angel Wuxin, King Jet, Yikwezixu, Feng Disheng, Ikjduiok, Book Friend 201810261058249446, and Evil Confused, for their generous support last month. I'll add another chapter tomorrow. I'm also grateful to everyone who's voted and subscribed during this time. I'll add another chapter on Sunday. That means 3 chapters each day. Fengsha, due to his work, was busy preparing for a database certification last month. I've been busy preparing for the exam, so I'll try to update regularly this month. Chapter 341, Setting Out for the Expedition. Kinuban was outside the Wall of Ashes, leading his men to clear the rubble and repair the ruins. Upon hearing the commotion, he rushed over. "What's this, boss?" he asked, stunned by the swarm of gargoyles. He was well aware of the number of gargoyles remaining in the altar hall. After all, he'd seen them, motionless like statues, during every sacrifice. But the gargoyle army before him far exceeded his memory. Furthermore, among the gargoyles were newer models with powerful auras and equally ferocious appearances. These, far more massive than the others, were clearly formidable. Those crimson massive gargoyles wouldn't have been a problem if they were just 1 or 2, but when they gathered in swarms of dozens, they gave Kinyu a powerful sense of oppression. Even at his weakest, Kinyu was at the forefront of the Fort of Ashes' fighting force. Even if they couldn't match the top fighters of the Ash Castle, they were still top tier SS level evolvers. How could these guys pose such a strong threat and pressure? They must be extraordinary. These are the new gargoyle armies I've just created, to aid in this battle, to destroy the 3 castles. Now, take your men, and prepare the vehicles needed for this expedition of 1,000 men. Also, have someone notify the cavalry and gather everyone to prepare for departure. Liu Ming casually explained, then gave a solemn order. This war was nominally a war of revenge, but Liu Ming naturally had more in mind. The various survivors west of Wuling City were scattered, fighting on their own, and it was time to change. He wanted Wuling City West to have a single voice from now on, the voice of the Ash Castle, and more importantly, his voice. "Understood, boss." Kinyu casually pointed out a few of his men in the crowd, then turned and began preparing the vehicles. The number of vehicles needed for a 1,000-man expedition was no small number in this era. He then sent someone to notify the cavalry, who were already re-equipping the Ash Castle warriors. A moment later, armored vans, trucks, pickups, dump trucks, and other modified vehicles rolled out, filling the open space in front of the Fort of Ashes main gate. In this perilous environment, ordinary vehicle hulls simply couldn't withstand the monster's casual attacks. Almost all of the vehicles still able to drive on the road were heavily and effectively armored. While their performance wasn't as robust as military armored vehicles, their endurance surpassed theirs, especially against the monster's ramming and biting attacks. Each vehicle resembled a silent ugly beast, its hulls clad in thick, patchwork steel plating. Even the windshields had been removed and reinforced with steel, leaving only a few small areas for visibility. After all, in the apocalypse, traffic accidents were non-existent. as long as they could withstand the monster's attacks. Crashing into walls or buildings, let alone the car itself, was a minor concern. These vehicles were completely encased in steel plating, like rolling steel fortresses. Boss, Ash Castle's original 98 vehicles and the 139 undamaged, drivable ones we captured are all ready. Kinyu parked the vehicles and hurried over to inform Liu Ming. Meanwhile, Ma Jun had already finished re-equipping his entire force. 89% of Ash Castle's stockpiled and captured Divine Grace had been distributed. Ash Castle's evolved classes each received at least 2 or 3 Divine Grace items of various levels, so many that they were decked out head to toe in Divine Grace gear. Their morale was high, as if this war wasn't a struggle, but rather a rewarding achievement. In stark contrast were the captives who had originally belonged to the 3 castles. Their equipment and weapons had been confiscated, and they were left huddled together, their faces gloomy as they held the standard issue weapons issued by Ash Castle. Although they hadn't been notified of the impending counterattack against the 3 castles, the atmosphere of impending change in Ash Castle had already given them a clue. The fact that they had been summoned this time was undoubtedly a sign of action. The prisoners of war from the 3 forts were naturally reluctant to attack their former employer, but the situation was stronger than they were, and the current situation didn't allow them to refuse. After all, saving their lives was a hard-earned achievement. Upon seeing Liu Ming again, Ma Jun clearly sensed something different about him. As an SSS level evolver, just one step away from stage 2, he was naturally very sensitive to the presence of others. Boss, you? Ma Jun couldn't help but ask. Noticing Ma Jun's difference, Liu Ming casually explained, your strength has improved a bit. However, this casual explanation sent shockwaves through Ma Jun's heart. Given the boss's strength, even a slight improvement would surely be even more terrifying. He couldn't help but feel more confident about this revenge battle. With the 3 forts' top fighters eliminated, their own team's top fighters had been boosted. With this balance of strength, their chances of victory naturally increased. Have them all wait in the vehicle, have Gong Weeksin, the Iron Guard captains, and Jin Deo come over, Liu Ming said, glancing at the excited Ma Jun. Under Ma Jun's command, the dense crowd immediately headed for the vehicles to prepare, while the Iron Guards gathered around Liu Ming. Boss, how are we going to fight this? Liu Huchuan excitedly spoke first. As one of Liu Ming's earliest followers, one of his most devoted followers, Liu Huchuan seemed eager for this first battle since his return. That's why I kept you here, Liu Ming explained with a smile, glancing at him. This guy's personality seemed unchanged over the past 6 months. Then, glancing at a sturdy figure, still a little pale, he spoke sternly, Gu Yun, you've just recovered from a serious injury. Just stay at headquarters and recuperate. Boss, I can do it. I've recovered, Gu Yuan said excitedly upon seeing Liu Ming's offer to stay. Liu Ming frowned, staring at him in silence, somewhat puzzled by his subordinate's insistence. Seeing Liu Ming's expression, Gu Yuan couldn't help but smile wryly, his heart aching. Even after 6 months of not seeing him, he still knew the character of this boss, who always held him in awe. He was a man of his word, and his opposition this time was forced upon him. He had his reasons for going. Although his physical injuries had healed thanks to the altar's powerful healing grace, his body had been severely strained and would require some time to fully recover. But his mental trauma remained unrecovered. The attack that nearly tore him in two, scattering his organs, now haunted him like a nightmare. At that moment, he was absolutely convinced he had seen the figure of death. Although the miraculous power of the grace had rescued him from death, it had not yet healed his mental trauma. He firmly believed that, only by achieving revenge on the 3 fortresses, could this nightmare finally vanish. Boss, promise me, I won't hold you back. That scene haunts me like a demon, and this time I must avenge myself. Upon hearing this, Liu Ming fell into a brief silence, then pondered for a moment. He spoke slowly, alright, but you won't be leading the charge. If you insist on forcing the assault, you don't have to go. Hearing this, Gu Yuan finally breathed a sigh of relief and readily agreed. Boss, I promise. I won't be leading the charge. This battle will still be led by the cavalry. Each Iron Guard will lead their own men and captured cannon fodder to form the battle group. I will lead the dragon pets, blood beasts, and these gargoyles as a surprise force, ready to provide reinforcement at any time. With this, Liu Ming's eyes gleamed as he uttered his final words before departing. One battle will determine victory. My absence is fine, but now that I'm back, after this battle, we will have the final say west of Wuling City. As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd's emotions boiled over. A simple battle of revenge, while equally stimulating, would not sway their hearts. After all, the outcome of this battle was uncertain, and Ash Castle was severely damaged. The best option now was to recuperate and recover, rather than ignite another war. But when revenge turned to plunder, even to the point of seizing control of the region west of Wuling City, the enormous benefits it represented galvanized everyone's fighting spirit. Even a commander as detached as Chu Gang was overcome with enthusiasm, eager to fly into the enemy ranks and slash his way in and out. They all knew that, even if they lost this battle, with Liu Ming at the helm, they could still restore their strength. Ash Castle would never again face the threat of destruction. A victory would mean a massive surge in its influence and power. The status of those high-ranking officials, whose fortunes lay with Ash Castle, would naturally rise accordingly. Chapter 342, Iron Fist Society in Crisis. Compared to the pre-battle excitement in Ash Fort, the Iron Fist Club's headquarters, not far away in space, was shrouded in a gloomy atmosphere. Tiger Zhu Yangwen and Fierce God Gancheng both perished in the battle for Ash Fort, leaving Ash Fort leaderless. However, news of the coalition's defeat had yet to spread. However, Lei Ze, the strongest and most responsible member remaining, had already learned of the situation through deserters, and was now at a loss. An unwritten rule among the small survivor settlements in Wuling was that at least one tier 2 evolved cultivator was at the core. After all, at this stage, not only were the monsters invading Earth from the spatial rifts, but even many of the creatures evolved from the Earth's anomaly had reached terrifying levels of development. Without cutting-edge combat power to counter them, it would be easy for evolved creatures or monsters of that level to annihilate a medium to large-scale settlement under their fury. Therefore, the presence of evolved cultivators capable of combating tier 2 monsters had become a defining characteristic of a settlement's strength. With the deaths of both Iron Fist Club leaders, Iron Fist Fort had lost its status as a minor fort within the unspoken rules of Wuling's many independent factions. Lei Ze, an SSS-level evolver, was considered the strongest of the remaining evolvers in the Iron Fist Club. As a veteran and core member of the club's founding, he enjoyed Yang Guan's trust and even served as commander, remaining behind at the club and successfully repelling the surprise attack by Ma Jun and his men. His abilities and strength were among the most exceptional within the Iron Fist Club, and the power and leadership of the club seemed within his grasp. However, he showed no sign of joy. He was well aware of his limitations, integrating Iron Fist Fort's forces to defend the club, while Yang Guan and his companions were away was already his limit. As for controlling the Iron Fist Club, a small fortress housing over 20,000 survivors, Lei Ze was well aware of his limitations. Not to mention, that some of the remaining evolvers in the Iron Fist Club were not easy targets. Even if they could propel him to power, he had no confidence in his ability to maintain stable control of the club. Although the Iron Fist Club had mobilized almost all its elite members to destroy the Ash Castle, he was not the only SSS-level evolutionary class remaining, and those individuals would likely find it difficult to acknowledge his leadership. Lei Ze gathered all his trusted associates within his residence. In fact, he was the first person in the entire Iron Fist Club to learn of the complete failure of the campaign to destroy the Ash Castle. This was because one of his men had just escaped and immediately reported the news to him. Failing, besides you, is there no one else who escaped? Lei Ze asked, frowning as he looked at his bloodied and trembling subordinates before him. He found it hard to believe that such a powerful coalition had been completely annihilated. Lei Ze's status within the Iron Fist Club was second only to Yang Guan and the other two because he was in charge of the club's most elite squadron of steel cavalry. The positioning and division of evolutionary classes, which served as the club's primary combat force, varied widely across the Wuling region. For example, the Ash Castle had 12 Iron Guards, and any evolutionary class on the combat side was classified as one of them. The Iron Fist Club's evolvers were divided into the Steel Cavalry according to their own rules. having forcibly seized a motorcycle factory near Iron Fist Fort from another small settlement. Iron Fist Fort possessed an extremely rich fleet of vehicles. Furthermore, this motorcycle factory was one of the few large-scale machinery factories in the entire Wuling region. Its Xiling motorcycles were popular throughout the country, with its focus on domestically produced heavy motorcycles. Even in peacetime, they enjoyed a strong reputation among motorcycle enthusiasts. Compared to high-end foreign heavy motorcycles, Xiling heavy motorcycles offered excellent value and durability. Therefore, upon seizing the Xiling motorcycle factory, the Iron Fist Club immediately replaced all outbound personnel with heavy motorcycles. They also equipped their troops with evolvers, who had modified heavy motorcycles, euphemistically naming them the Steel Knights, thus establishing the Iron Fist Club's Steel Cavalry formation. Lei Ze commanded the Iron Fist Club's most elite and largest unit of Steel Cavalry. However, in this battle, most of his Steel Cavalry participated in the disastrous Battle of Ash Castle, naturally suffering heavy casualties. Fortunately, as the chief officer left behind, he naturally left some men behind to deal with any unforeseen circumstances. However, despite his numerous excuses, Yang Wan ultimately only left him with a small squad of 50 men. Remember, his original 1st Steel Cavalry Command consisted of 400 evolved professionals and hundreds of heavy motorcycles. In this battle, almost all of their resources were lost. The evolved person known as Fei Ling replied with a look of grief and indignation. Boss Lei, the legendary leader of Ash Castle has returned. Chief Yang Wan died at his hands. He was like a demon from hell, his attacks unleashing a sea of blood. Even the masters of Hurricane Castle and the Sandstorm Society were no match for him. In the end, he slew the entire coalition's top brass one by one, and finally, with the Ash Castle men, he routed us completely. I had better run fast, otherwise, Boss Lei, you wouldn't have seen me, and how would I have known if the other brothers had escaped? Upon hearing his subordinate's response, Lei Zejin frowned, his expression deepening with anguish. The more his men portrayed the figure who had turned the tide and destroyed the coalition, the more depressing he became. After all, the situation was unclear, and no one knew whether that figure would lead his forces to Iron Fist Fort for revenge. Iron Fist Fort was, after all, the closest coalition force to Ashford. This was the very reason Yang Wan had previously insisted, against all odds, on leading his elite troops to join the coalition's destruction of Ashford. After all, Iron Fist was closest to Ashford, and if Ashford was destroyed, Iron Fist would undoubtedly benefit the most, according to the principle that those closest to the water would reap the moon first. It was precisely this argument that ultimately convinced Iron Fist's leaders to join the full-scale attack. However, now that the war was lost, Lei Ze, as the closest smaller fort to Ashford, naturally understood that, if Ashford chose to attack, this once important advantage would become its greatest disadvantage. If Ashford took action, the likelihood of targeting Iron Fist, the closest indirect line, was incredibly high. Go and inform the 3 Steel Cavalry captains to come to me to discuss countermeasures. Lei Ze instructed a sturdy man with a strong temperament and a sturdy build, and a centipede-like scar on his head. The sturdy man said nothing, nodded slightly, and walked out. Lei Ze didn't care. This sturdy man was not only his subordinate, but also the captain of the only remaining Steel Cavalry squad under his command. He was also an SS-level evolver, and he regarded him as a subordinate he could rely on. By the way, don't tell them about the defeat of the 3-man coalition yet. Just notify them to come to the meeting. Lei Ze added a sentence as the sturdy man was about to walk out the door. The sturdy man paused, without turning back, just nodded and walked away quickly. Chapter 343. After receiving a notification from Liu Ming, a squad leader of Lei Ze's Iron Fist Steel Cavalry, the other 3 Steel Cavalry captains stationed at headquarters who had not joined the coalition forces in the attack, rushed to Lei Ze's residence, each with a sense of foreboding. They knew Liu Ming's background well. In peacetime, he was a ruthless thug specializing in collecting bad debts from loan companies, specifically targeting stubborn debtors with unforgiving tactics. He claimed that there was no debt he could not collect, except the dead. His subsequent membership in the Iron Fist Club did not change his aggressive nature, and he even gained a reputation for his daring and aggressive fighting style. According to the Iron Fist Club's battle hierarchy, the Iron Fist Steel Cavalry is divided into 3 ranks, the lowest being squad leader, followed by squad leader, and finally captain. Therefore, Liu Ming's status wasn't that far behind Th's, especially considering that Lei's Iron Fist Steel Cavalry could boast a massive force of 400. The other Iron Fist Iron Cavalry captains commanded no more than 100 men at most, or 2 or 3 squads, often with fewer than a full staff of 50. In other words, a captain like Liu Ming, commanding an elite squad with a full staff, held a position far superior to Th's within the Iron Fist's battle hierarchy. After all the elite Iron Fist Iron Cavalry had been led by Yang Guan to attack the Ash Castle. Those left behind, with the exception of Liu, were at the bottom of the Steel Cavalry captain's ranks. However, Liu Ming, who had always been quite rude to them, was surprisingly silent when he announced the meeting. He simply delivered the news in a grave tone, devoid of his usual arrogance. Instead, he remained stern and gloomy throughout. Coupled with the fact that Liu, the remaining commander, had called the meeting, the 3 remaining Steel Cavalry captains felt a pang of unease. It seemed this meeting was definitely not about good news. Everyone's here, and I have some news to share. I hope you're all prepared. By the time Liu addressed the assembled crowd, they had already guessed the details. Their faces, like Liu Ming's, were gloomy, practically dripping with water. When Fei Ling shattered the coalition forces, the 2 Iron Fist leaders were slain by Liu Ming, and the coalition soldiers were either massacred or captured, with only a 10th surviving. Their expressions shifted, their thoughts swirling. You all know the news. The former leader of Ash Castle has returned, and the coalition forces have been decimated. This spells a shift not just for the Iron Fist, but for Wuling itself. Liu spoke with profound meaning, interrupting their musings. What does Captain Liu mean? A middle-aged Steel Cavalry captain, seemingly in his 30s or 40s, asked, the first to react. I know what everyone is thinking. The leader is dead, and only a handful of our former brothers survive. Only the 4 of us, old men, remain in this vast Iron Fist Club. But don't forget, the reason our Iron Fist Club was able to survive in this apocalypse was because of the might and power of our 2 leaders. To be frank, relying on just a few of us, we wouldn't be able to hold on to this legacy. Believe it or not, the Iron Fist Club would be annihilated tomorrow. Liu snorted coldly. Upon hearing this, the 3 Steel Cavalry captains, each with their own thoughts, paled. They had indeed been tempted to carve up a piece of the pie. After all, the Iron Fist Club now only had the 4 most powerful and influential members left. Combined, they now commanded 80% to 90% of the remaining Iron Fist Club power. Especially since, excluding Liu's other 3, most of his Steel Cavalry were annihilated in the coalition attack, but the Steel Cavalry under his 3 men remained intact. The 3 of them commanded a combined force of 400 to 500 men, and combined they could easily control the entire Iron Fist Club. However, Liu's words completely extinguished their fleeting fantasies and greed. Now was definitely not the time for the Iron Fist Club to carve up the pie and scramble for power. Without its 2 leaders, the Iron Fist Club was like a tiger without claws, an eagle without wings and claws. They wouldn't be at the mercy of anyone, but they certainly wouldn't be able to protect their legacy. Just like how they'd wiped out an entire settlement out of greed, seized the Xiling motorcycle factory, and monopolized the only heavy motorcycle factory in Wuling. Others, for the sake of the Iron Fist Club's legacy, would send them off and completely change hands. The other Steel Cavalry captain was also at a loss. He could only ask Liu, who got the news first, and was the head of the Iron Fist Club appointed by Yang Guan himself before the attack on Ash Castle. Then what do you say we should do? Liu did not pretend, and directly expressed his thoughts. The situation is still unclear, and I can't believe the one-sided words of my men. The current priority is to determine the specific news of the demise of the coalition forces in Ash Castle. Of course, we must also make preparations early, lest the news spreads and we are directly torn and eaten by those hidden us lurking in the dark. As soon as he finished speaking, he added, now is not the time for us to fight among ourselves for power, so I will temporarily take charge of the affairs of Iron Fist Castle. Do you have any objections? The 3 steel cavalry captains looked at each other and nodded in succession, temporarily acknowledging his position as the person in charge. Laser nodded. Okay, then. I'll each send a few of my men, skilled in speed and reconnaissance, to Ash Castle to gather information and determine whether the coalition has been destroyed. We'll have Liu Ming arrange the personnel here, and you. Laser hadn't finished his words when a figure scurried into the conference room. Before the figure paused, a cold, sharp voice rang out. No need to investigate. The coalition forces from the 3 castles were completely destroyed at Ash Castle, and they are gathering their forces. I'm afraid they'll be at the gates soon and tell you the details with swords. Everyone in the conference room was startled by the arrival of this person, seemingly guessing their identity, yet still a little unsure. Who are you? Hehe, didn't you guess who I am? The cold voice straightened itself, revealing a pale, bloodless young face. Blood Vampire General? A steel cavalryman under Laser's command exclaimed. It's you. Laser then spoke, his voice thick with fear. Of course it's me. My men have received news of the coalition's defeat, and the Ash Castle troops are already gathering. Time is running out for you. The Iron Fist Club, the young man known as the Blood Vampire General said sarcastically. It seems your Blood Vampire Club has been suppressed by our leader, Yang Guan. Are you here out of kindness? Laser asked, perplexed. The Blood Vampire General was the leader of a medium-sized settlement not far from the Iron Fist Club. He was also a level 2 evolver, but he founded the settlement relatively late, and the pie had already been divided. Even with his considerable strength, he could only grow it to 1,000 members before it was exhausted. Furthermore, due to his base's proximity to the Iron Fist Castle, he had been repeatedly suppressed by the Iron Fist Club. When the 2 leaders, Yang Guan, were around, these steel cavalry captains could ignore the Blood Vampire General, even scoffing at his self-proclaimed title of general. But now, the fate of the 2 leaders was unknown. The Iron Fist Club was leaderless, and he could single-handedly sweep away the Iron Fist Club's high-ranking officials present. Therefore, his sudden visit made the 4 members of the Iron Fist Club appear one after another. Chapter 344 Blood Swordsman. Of course I'm here to lend you a helping hand. To the surprise of the Iron Fist, the Blood Vampire General simply nodded in agreement in response to Laser's question. This response caused their expressions to change, and they pondered. Laser couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart as he looked at the tall, thin young man before him, pale and bloodless. He wore a tattered grey cloak, a blood-red long sword slung in a dark red iron scabbard at his waist, his hair tangled like a bird's nest, and he seemed unkempt. This man had a bad temper, as evidenced by his title of Blood Vampire General. While the title General was purely self-proclaimed, the Blood Vampire lived up to the name. The blood symbolized his evolved class, Blood Swordsman. The demon symbolized the growth-enhancing divine weapon he slung at his waist, the Crimson Ghost Sword. Every member of the Iron Fist present was significantly older than the Blood Vampire General before him, yet not a single one of them showed any disdain for him. By this time, the titles of Ju, the title of Zen or Gancheng had spread throughout the Wuling region, and Yang Guan had been included in the Tiger Ju list. Although Chen Human had not yet earned the title of Fierce God Gancheng and likely never would, he was considered a ruthless and powerful figure second only to Yang Guan. Blood Vampire General CXIU was able to maintain his Blood Vampire Society's sliver of territory despite the combined forces of these 2 ruthless individuals, demonstrating his strength and ability to be underestimated. Previously, with Yang Guan and Chen Human as his superiors, steel cavalry captains like Laser had little respect for this second-tier powerhouse. However, now that the taller men were dead, the Iron Fist Society's leaders were no match for the Blood Vampire General. Even if they could threaten him, they couldn't. The Blood Vampire General dared to infiltrate Iron Fist Castle alone. To claim he had no preparations or backup plans was doubtful. I said I'm here to help you, and you're all silent, because you look down on me? Are you pretending to be deaf and dumb in front of me? The Ash Castle will soon attack your Iron Fist Castle, and you guys aren't in the least bit anxious, said the Blood Vampire General CXIU, his lips curled in a mocking expression. Then tell me how you're going to help us. Laser, the current highest ranking member of the Iron Fist Club, asked with only the necessary courage, prompted by glances from his colleagues. It's simple. My Blood Vampire Club can help you through this. The battle for Ash Castle will undoubtedly inflict heavy casualties on both sides. The forces that Ash Castle can send to attack the Iron Fist Club at this time shouldn't be too large. With the combined strength of your Iron Fist Club and my Blood Vampire Club, we might be able to resist. The Blood Vampire General stated his thoughts bluntly. Lazy and the others knew the Blood Vampire General had more to say. He had only stated how the club would help the Iron Fist Club, but not what they would have to contribute. There was absolutely no such thing as unwarranted help. This statement was even more accurate in the apocalypse. From these words, Lazy finally confirmed the Blood Vampire General's intentions. It was definitely not to take advantage of someone's misfortune or seek revenge. However, whether he was taking advantage of someone's misfortune would require further investigation. He frowned and asked, "What's the price?" The Blood Vampire General smiled, realizing he had finally hit the nail on the head. "It's simple. After repelling the Ash Fort's army, my Blood Vampire Society will take control of Iron Fist Fort. From now on, I have the final say in Iron Fist. You're so blinded by greed. Wishful thinking. You're just a wolf in sheep's clothing. You're taking advantage of someone's misfortune." As soon as he finished speaking, the Iron Fist Club's several steel cavalry captains, who had previously been wary of him, erupted in anger, denouncing the Blood Vampire General's ambitions. While he hadn't come to exact revenge on the Iron Fist Club, he intended to seize their assets directly. He wanted the entire Iron Fist Fort. How could the members of the Iron Fist Club accept this? The Blood Vampire Society, once trembling in fear under the Iron Fist Society's suppression, even treading on thin ice, now wanted to seize control of Iron Fist Fort, becoming the masters of the land. Even though they were inferior in strength, they could not bear such an insult. Hehe, you can certainly refuse now, but once you hear that the Ash Fort army is approaching, I'm afraid you won't be able to refuse. The Blood Vampire General ignored the crowd's angry rebukes and spoke with a smile. Lazy snorted coldly, "Regardless of whether what you said is true or not, even if Ash Fort really attacks, without you, Blood Vampire General, do we think we can survive this gamble? The coalition may be destroyed, but my Iron Fist Society still has many allies, some of whom are capable of crushing your Blood Vampire Society." Yang Wan and Chen Humin had been running Iron Fist Fort for over 6 months, firmly establishing themselves in the Wuling region. Naturally, they were not alone. They could turn to more than just the Blood Vampire Society for assistance. Vampire General CXIU slapped Lazy away and plopped down on the main seat in the conference room. He sneered confidently, "TSK, TSK, TSK, TSK. Go get some help and see who'll help you." He seemed to be saying, "I'll just sit there and watch you cry until you see your coffin." Lazy and the others exchanged glances, and Lazy led Li Mengyan out of the conference room. CXIU remained seated in the upper seat, not moving at all, seemingly unfazed by the possibility that Lazy was gathering forces to surround and kill him. A moment later, Lazy walked into the conference room with an extremely gloomy expression. Li Mengyan did not return with him. "What's the situation?" A steel cavalry captain, observing his expression, asked hurriedly, his expression unsettling. Lazy sneered and replied, "They all rejected my request for assistance, saying that the Ash Castle was too powerful and no match for them. They told us to draw the main attack from the Ash Castle, and they would send out troops to attack based on the situation." Damn it, what do you mean by attacking based on the situation? It's just a trick of taking advantage of the situation while the Oreo waits. These bastards, playing this trick on us now. Upon hearing this, the meeting room erupted in curses. "Where's Li Mengyan?" someone asked. Li Mengyan commanded the most elitely organized steel cavalry squad. At this juncture, whoever had the most power held the most influence. Besides the 4 steel cavalry captains, he was one of the most influential figures, and naturally needed to be present at the entire meeting that hinged on the survival of the Iron Fist. However, Li Mengyan's absence from following Lazy was puzzling. "I've sent him ahead to deploy defenses. Although they are unwilling to support us, they've confirmed the coalition's annihilation, the deaths of their 2 leaders, and the gathering of Ash Castle's forces to launch a war of revenge against the coalition's remnants. This time, I'm afraid our remaining forces alone won't be enough to survive this crisis," Lazy said, glancing at the Blood Vampire General. who sat calmly at the head of the conference room. Blood Vampire General CXIU was a supporting character for Ash Zioi, a book friend who had always supported Feng Shi. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345. Compromise before the enemy. What are you looking at me for? Do you understand the value of my timely assistance? The Blood Vampire General grinned, glancing around at everyone in the conference room. Laser frowned at the Blood Vampire General's nonchalant expression. The Ash Castle is coming with such force this time. Even if we trust you, do you think your Blood Vampire Society can withstand it? Blood Vampire General CXIU raised a brow, looked around at everyone, and said with pride, how do we know, if we don't try? If it weren't for your two short-lived leaders joining forces, neither of them alone could have overwhelmed me. Although these words made the Iron Fist members present feel a little uncomfortable, they all knew their words were true. Compared to the Iron Fist Castle, the Blood Vampire General's Blood Vampire Society was much smaller, occupying only a few grey altars, not even a white one. Yet, they had managed to survive the constant suppression of the Iron Fist Society, a true feat. Furthermore, Yang Wan had previously fought CXIU, the outcome of which was unknown. It was said to be a draw, but leader Yang Wan had returned injured. What are your thoughts? Lei Ze asked, gazing at the crowd. A steel cavalry captain countered, are you sure Ashburg still has enough strength to attack us? Lei Ze remained calm in the face of his colleagues' questioning, replying, a force of over 1,000 men from Ashburg is heading towards Iron Fist Castle. I've confirmed this information from 4 of our former so-called allies. If the information is true, as long as the Blood Vampire General can help us survive this crisis, it's perfectly acceptable for him to take control of Iron Fist Castle. Another steel cavalry captain spoke first. He was well aware of the current situation facing the entire Iron Fist. With fewer than 400 men remaining, most of them were not elite. They simply couldn't withstand an attack from Ashburg. Rather than waiting to be destroyed and eventually slaughtered, it was better to make plans. Second, Lei Ze and the steel cavalry captain who had raised the question followed suit. I second this too. The last steel cavalry captain finally nodded in agreement, pondering the matter. Following the final command from the Iron Fist leader, the Vampire General finally stood up. His sharp gaze swept across each face, and he finally chuckled. Very good. After all this wasted time, at least you didn't make a wrong choice. As the new master of Iron Fist Castle, I now command you to open the gates and let my vampire warriors in. Upon hearing this, the Iron Fist members' expressions changed, but they had no choice but to obey. The vampires, already deployed from a hidden location a kilometer from Iron Fist Castle, saw the gates open, and, knowing their boss's plan was a success, rushed over. Modified vehicles, carrying hundreds of vampire warriors, drove into Iron Fist Castle. As the vampires entered, Lei Ze was stunned to discover that the vampires within Iron Fist Castle now outnumbered the remaining Iron Fist forces. Despite the cuckoo taking over, Lei Ze and the others were helpless. Now, all of you, cooperate with my men in deploying our defenses. As the Blood Vampires entered Iron Fist Fort, Blood Vampire General CXIU began issuing his second order. What? We're being asked to cooperate? I think it's you who should cooperate. Don't forget, we are the masters. Suddenly, the steel cavalry, unable to accept the current situation, erupted in riot. CXIU didn't say much. His brows furrowed, and the long sword at his waist switched out with a whoosh. Endless blood red and sword energy enveloped everyone around him. The rebellious steel cavalry were instantly suppressed by the sword's sharp edge, and they suffered unbearable pain. Are you seeking death? CXIU's cold voice rang out. Just as the steel cavalry members were about to collapse under the overwhelming sword energy, Lei Ze pleaded, General, please deploy your defenses against the enemy and spare them. Next time you can't control your men, don't blame me for coming to discipline them. Don't forget, from now on, you are all my men. Blood Vampire General CXIU snorted coldly, and his blood-red long sword instantly slipped back into its scabbard, its infinite sharpness vanishing. The suppressed steel cavalry members climbed to their feet, as if having escaped death, drenched in sweat but unharmed. Their expressions, however, were filled with fear as they looked at Blood Vampire General CXIU. CXIU's request for the Iron Fist Society to coordinate with his own forces in the defenses appeared to be a reversal of power, refusing to allow those familiar with the layout of Iron Fist Fort to do so, while his own group of amateurs took action. In reality, as the closest survivor to Iron Fist Fort, and one who had never surrendered to or even yielded to the Iron Fist Society, he was fully aware of its various defensive measures and defenses, and naturally needed no dictates from the former owners. Moreover, the Blood Vampire General never trusted outsiders, even those who had nominally acknowledged his leadership of Iron Fist Fort. However, anyone could see that this was merely a single, unpredictable choice forced upon the Iron Fist Club in a life or death situation. Under the command of CXIU's elite men, the entire Iron Fist Fort sprang into action like a massive war machine. Defensive weapons were brought out of storage and placed throughout the city walls and towers. The first priority for any survivor settlement was naturally the construction of the city walls. Therefore, Iron Fist Fort's defenses were not weak. As the defenses were well underway, a flying white figure approached from the distant sky. Liu Ming, one of Lei Ze's men, was the first to spot the white figure. As he realized it wasn't one of his familiars, he was about to command his ranged specialists to attack when a pale slender arm reached out from behind to stop him. He turned and saw it was none other than Blood Vampire General CXIU. He had learned the final decision of the Iron Fist Club's leadership, and he knew exactly what stance he should maintain. "Sir? Why is that? They are my men. Why are you still planning to attack?" Blood Vampire General CXIU asked with a smile. "I dare not." Liu Ming quickly shook his head and turned aside, pretending not to notice the white figure. The Blood Vampire General narrowed his eyes as he watched Liu Ming's retreating figure, secretly finding him amusing. The white figure suddenly plummeted from the sky, landing beside the Blood Vampire General. "Phew, I'm exhausted," a clear female voice said with a hint of resentment. The Blood Vampire General, hands behind his back, looked at the person who had spoken before him and said, "Haha, don't exhaust yourself yet. Tell me the situation. How many people have come from Ash Castle?" Compared to the coldness he had shown to the Iron Fist Society, his words to this person were much more gentle. "Your plan is likely to fail. Liu Ming, the leader of Ash Castle who killed Yangguan and Chen Humin, is leading an army of at least 2,000 men." The white figure was a petite beautiful woman. After landing on the city wall, she retracted her light-like wings into her body, her tone heavy. "Are you sure you're not seeing things? Where did he get so many people?" CXIU asked in surprise. Chapter 346 Test. "Nonsense. Could I be wrong?" The petite woman raised an eyebrow in a disapproving retort, seemingly showing little respect for the Blood Vampire General. "There are at least 200 modified vehicles alone, mostly medium-sized and large." Upon hearing this, Blood Vampire General CXIU's brow furrowed into a deep frown, his composed demeanor changing from the Iron Fist clans. With a wry smile, he said, "This is going to be difficult. At least 200 modified vehicles could surely transport an army of at least 2,000 men." Although he was baffled as to how Ash Castle, with a pre-war force of only 2,000, could still deploy 2,000 men after such a loss, he decided to trust the account of his winged assassin, renowned for his scouting and speed. He could never have imagined that Liu Ming would actually transport allied prisoners directly into battle, seemingly fearing a critical moment of rebellion and heavy losses. "I had originally planned to seek wealth and glory through risk, hoping to take control of Iron Fist Castle, but now the gains have been in vain." Thinking of the potential that Ash Castle had demonstrated in its defensive battle the day before, his scalp tingled. He had a clear understanding of his own strength. Taking on Yangguan alone was no problem, and Chen Humin was even more of a crushing threat. However, if Yangguan and Chen Humin joined forces, he would be no match. And he knew he was no match for those who could directly destroy them, or even the truly ruthless Zeduo Heng of Hurricane Castle and Lu Zuan of the Sandstorm Society. If he was no match, why did he even appear in the Iron Fist Society's troubled territory at this critical juncture? He had his reasons. In the Battle of Ash Castle, 9 factions joined forces, known as the Nine Castles Coalition, each of which was more powerful than his vampire society. However, according to his intelligence, only 3 factions ultimately participated in the attack on Ash Castle. And those 3 happened to be the strongest of the 9 castles. The defeat of the main forces and leaders of these 3 factions at Ashford, their complete destruction, would undoubtedly lead to a reshuffle of the 3 major factions. Even if Ashford didn't take action, other factions would intervene to plunder their resources. As the saying goes, a toothless tiger is no better than a cat, and these 3 factions currently find themselves in this awkward position. As the closest gathering place to Iron Fist Fort, he naturally wanted a piece of the action. Of course, the benefits and risks of this share were equally great. It would have been fine if Ashford didn't take action, but if it did, he knew he wouldn't be able to resist. However, he chose to act anyway, taking Iron Fist Fort first, taking advantage of their proximity. He believed that Ashford would suffer losses in this battle, perhaps even devastating ones. Given these heavy losses, the typical leader would have secretly developed and recovered their strength. Unexpectedly, Ashford threw aside their usual cautious approach and launched an all-out attack, even assembling a force far superior to their own. Man proposes, God disposes. Originally, if he could repel a few waves of attacks against Iron Fist Castle, slowly gain a foothold, and complete his strategy before Ash Castle launched its full attack, or rather, before Ash Castle accumulated enough power to launch a sweeping attack, he could form alliances with surrounding forces equally hostile to Ash Castle, forging a united front against this still rising monster. Then, naturally, he wouldn't have to fear Ash Castle's retaliation. However, all of this was just speculation. He never expected Ash Castle to arrive so quickly, or so powerful. They would launch an all-out attack on the very first day of the Battle of Destruction. A force of 2,000. These 2,000 troops didn't mean just 2,000 survivors. They meant warriors with the fighting power of evolved classes. Their strength was already far superior to that of ordinary people. Even a 1-on-10 attack would be a piece of cake. The vampire general sighed as he looked at a small black dot slowly appearing at the end of the road in the distance. They're coming. What are you going to do? The petite figure delivering the message asked anxiously, losing her composure. CXIU's previous composure vanished completely. He sighed softly. What else can we do? If the enemy comes, we'll stop them with our generals. If the water comes, we'll block it with earth. That being said, if we couldn't even block the water with earth, then even if we were to block the enemy with our generals, CXIU, the vampire general, had no confidence in stopping the mysterious and powerful Liu Ming, the leader of the Ash Fort. However, he had already occupied Iron Fist Fort, and the Ash Fort troops were almost at the gate. Even retreating now was too late. A black dot at the end of the road, rising in a cloud of dust, slowly grew larger. A rumbling sound could be heard from afar. Hundreds of modified medium and large vehicles, loaded with evolved warriors, rushed unimpeded from the end of the road towards Iron Fist Fort like a silent behemoth. Liu Ming sat in the lead, a modified Humvee. This vehicle had been gifted to him by Gong Weixin's brother. After numerous modifications and even several enchantments by magic professionals, its armor and defense were now comparable to those of a main battle tank. The Ash Armored Vehicle, that was the name of this modified Humvee. Aside from the driver, there was only Liu Ming, along with miniature versions of Jizeli Rang and Sumia Zhao. Marjan and other high-ranking members of Ash Castle were all seated in separate vehicles. In wartime, it's unwise for all commanders to sit in the same vehicle, even if these powerful commanders are not immune to so-called decapitation tactics. Liu Ming, seated in the armored vehicle, rose from the sunroof of the ashes. His upper body emerged from the roof, and he surveyed the Ash Castle before him with unbridled abandon. 5 or 6 meters high, a drab grey wall, simply reinforced with cement, came into view. A pale figure, cradling a scarlet sword in front of his chest, and wearing a tattered cloak that fluttered in the wind, stood on the wall, also sizing up the ill-intentioned armored convoy. A sudden surge of spiritual energy erupted from Liu Ming's eyes, sweeping up nearly invisible dust particles in the air, and forming a sharp cone that shot straight toward the Iron Fist Fort walls, nearly 1,000 meters away. For an evolver of Liu Ming's level, or 1000 meters wasn't necessarily far, at least it was within reach for a forceful attack. However, weakened by the nearly 1000-meter spatial barrier, the cone-shaped spiritual energy wave's power had been reduced by more than half by the time it reached the Iron Fist fort walls. While invisible spiritual attacks are invisible to ordinary people, to the Vampire General CXIU, they were as obvious as a direct attack. HMPH. He snorted coldly at the incoming attack. Without drawing his sword, he simply clasped his right hand's 5 fingers together, forming a sword palm and slashing forward. Countless tiny crimson sword energies seemed to emerge from the void, one after another crashing into Liu Ming's spiritual attack. When the cone-shaped attack reached half a meter between CXIU's eyebrows, the sword energy finally dissipated completely into the air. A second-level swordsman? Liu Ming frowned, puzzled. Yang Guan and Chen Human were already dead. When would Iron Fist have a third second-level professional? Who was this guy? P.S. This chapter was added to support the helmsman Xian Haoyu's 10,000 yuan reward. I was a bit busy the past 2 days, so I'll make up for it today. Chapter 347 Bloodbeast destroys the city. Ma Jun, riding in a modified sub behind the ashes, witnessed Liu Ming's attack clearly. He immediately recognized the mysterious figure standing on the Iron Fist fort wall, blocking Liu Ming's probing attack. As if sensing Liu Ming's confusion, he stuck his head out the car window and loudly explained to Liu Ming, "Boss, that guy isn't from the Iron Fist Society. He was previously the leader of a small settlement struggling to survive under the Iron Fist Society's suppression, but he's quite powerful." The roar of the car's engines filled the air, but his voice reached Liu Ming's ears clearly. "How strong is he?" Liu Ming asked, turning his head. Ma Jun pondered for a moment before saying, "Probably not weaker than Yang Guan." "Not weaker than Yang Guan?" Liu Ming disagreed. That meant he wasn't much stronger. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so cowardly as to be suppressed by the Iron Fist Society. This guy was quite interesting. He had just destroyed the main force of the Iron Fist Society, and now he was coming to reap the spoils. What a plan! Exclamation mark. Swish. Liu Ming flung open all the roof windows and leaped from the armored vehicle. A massive blood-red figure sprinted from the rear of the convoy, flashing past like a blood-red phantom in an instant, before catching Liu Ming mid-air. This blood-red figure was none other than the Kangao Blood Beast. Looking at the tightly shut steel gates of Iron Fist Fort, Liu Ming narrowed his eyes and spoke to the Kangao Blood Beast beneath him. "Blast that city." As soon as he finished speaking, at Liu Ming's command, the Kangao Blood Beast transformed into a streak of blood-red lightning, streaking through the air. A whoosh echoed, the only sound being the friction of objects and air. Atop the city wall, Blood Vampire General CXIU also witnessed Liu Ming spurring his mount towards the city gate. "Activate all defenses, except the purple annihilation cannon, to intercept that blood-red figure." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dozens of Divine Grace heavy crossbows atop the city walls opened fire, their bolts, each as thick as a child's arm and nearly a meter long, blasting towards Liu Ming, and the blood-red phantom transformed by the Kangao Blood Beast. Sonic booms ripped through the air, each special crossbow bolt exceeding the speed of sound. However, the Kangao Blood Beast's agility and reflexes surpassed the imagination of the Iron Fist Fort's defenders. The attack, like a hail of arrows engulfing Blood Shadow's entire body, was narrowly avoided. Ultimately, the multiple volleys of crossbow bolts failed to halt the Kangao Blood Beast's rapid advance towards the Iron Fist Fort gates. General Bloodlight's expression darkened. With the crossbow bolts ineffective, a group of ranged specialists gathered and began indiscriminately attacking the Kangao Blood Beast. Energy destruction balls, wind blades, and other long-range energy attacks were unleashed upon Blood Shadow as it drew ever closer to Iron Fist Fort. The energy attacks collided with a rumbling sound, and for a moment, the area in front of Iron Fist Fort erupted in a dazzling display of colors, like a riot of fireworks. However, even this intense energy attack couldn't stop the Blue Hook Blood Beast's charge. A blood-red phantom burst forth from the area, formed by the collision of the multicolored energy attacks. By this time, the Blue Hook Blood Beast, carrying Liu Ming, was no more than 200 meters from the Iron Fist Fort's gates. The Blood Vampire General's expression grew solemn. "This is not a friendly situation. Attack." Unleash the full energy of the purple annihilation cannon. A flicker of hesitation crossed the blood vampire general's face, but he finally gave a resolute order to Laze and his men. This was the core of Iron Fist Fort's defenses, yet they hadn't expected it to be deployed so soon. Laze and his men, who had been waiting with their weapons sharp, nodded and hurriedly directed their men to action. 8 strange turrets dotted along the Iron Fist Fort's walls began to flash with dazzling purple light. The barrels alone were as thick as an adult's embrace, nearly 10 meters long, and the bases were massive, requiring the combined efforts of several men. Under the command of several Iron Fist cavalry captains from Laser, they began to swivel their cannons, aiming in the direction of the blood-red phantom's attack. Boom. The barrel of the first purple annihilation cannon suddenly retracted, and the first shot fired. This was followed by a series of deafening cannonshots. Boom, boom, boom. The entire walls of Iron Fist Fort shook repeatedly. 8 beams of purple light pierced the air, blasting towards the blood-red phantom with uncanny precision. The blood-red phantom's momentum faltered, and it made no attempt to evade the purple annihilation cannon. Instead, a figure leaped high from the blood-red phantom's back. As the figure leaped, an invisible energy barrier, an oval, egg-shaped barrier, formed before it. The purple beams of light fiercely bombarded the barrier. The purple beams of light from the purple annihilation cannon, colliding with the invisible barrier, began to melt like snowflakes in the scorching sun. The immense impact shook the invisible barrier, sending it retreating step by step. A flicker of surprise flashed across Liu Ming's eyes at the destructive power of the purple light. However, it was only surprise. Tiny grains of yellow sand began to appear out of thin air, and the previously invisible barrier of telekinesis gradually began to transform into a barrier of yellow sand. Boom boom boom. The 8 energy cannons continued firing, and before the 8 purple beams of light had dissipated, 8 more were added. The telekinetic barrier, in turn, completely transformed from invisible and transparent into a dark yellow barrier of sand. Countless yellow sand danced, blocking Liu Ming's path like a dune, impenetrable and blocking each beam of purple light. Both the purple light and the yellow sand were rapidly dissipating, but the sand's speed was clearly much slower than the purple light. Using the Ksitagaba secret, the telekinetic barrier directly blocked the 8 energy cannons' attack. By then, the man and the beast were less than 100 meters from the Iron Fist Fort. After the telekinetic barrier once again blocked the energy cannon's direct attack, the Kangal blood beast took advantage of the situation and burst through the barrier. With a resounding boom, the Kangal blood beast slammed directly into the Iron Fist Fort gate at lightning speed. Before Blood Vampire General CXIU and the Iron Fist Fort's inhabitants could react, the gate had completely collapsed, shattering into several pieces. Countless rubble tumbled down. With a single impact, the Iron Fist Fort's main gate was destroyed. A behemoth, covered in dark red scales, and imposing in its presence, appeared where the gate had once stood. Its eyes gleamed with cruelty and bloodlust as it scoured the Iron Fist Fort warriors before it. The Blood Vampire General, watching the Ash Fort army rapidly approaching Iron Fist and rushing towards the gate, felt a chill in his heart. The 8 energy cannons had lost their target. Once Liu Ming had officially broken through to within 50 meters of Iron Fist Fort, the 8 massive cannons mounted on the wall had lost their aim. He stared at the behemoth below the wall and the sturdy figure who had single-handedly blocked the direct barrage of 8 purple annihilation cannons. The Blood Vampire General's expression shifted unpredictably. Go down and fight that guy? He hadn't the slightest confidence. Not fight? The enemy had already reached his doorstep. Could he still expect them to show mercy? The Blood Vampire General was at a loss. Liu Ming looked at the remnants of Iron Fist Fort before him, their faces gazing at him, and the Kangal blood beast with horror. He curled his lips and said coldly, I'm not here to kill. I'll give you 10 breaths to lay down your weapons. Those who don't will die. Bang. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of weapons falling to the ground echoed. The first to drop his weapon was a burly giant wielding a massive mace. He was the captain of the steel cavalry squad guarding the city gates. With the gates breached, his mission was a complete failure. This man had withstood the purple annihilation cannon. As far as he knew, the previous leader of the Iron Fist Society would never have been able to withstand 8 purple annihilation cannons. This man was definitely far more formidable than leader Yang Guan. Facing a ferocious individual who could easily crush him, it was wise to give up resistance. Since the higher-ups were planning to hand Iron Fist Fort over to the vampires anyway, what difference would that make if it simply handed it over to Ash Fort? On the contrary, if Ash Fort took control of Iron Fist Fort, at least they wouldn't have to worry so terribly about retaliation. As he dropped his weapon without a second thought, his entire steel cavalry unit followed their captain's lead. Then another, and then another. Soon, the Iron Fist Fort warriors, facing Liu Ming and the Kangal Bloodbeast at the city gate, were terrified and trembling. With the exception of a few unfortunate souls who were crushed by the collapsing gates when the Kangal Bloodbeast breached the city, no one was killed or injured. They all gave up their suicidal plans. Chapter 348 You are surrounded? After the dozen or so evolved guards stationed at the city gates surrendered without a fight, led by their squad leaders, Iron Fist Fort's morale plummeted. The Blood Vampire General, the commander, was momentarily flustered, feeling a sense of dread and difficulty. With the city gate breached, Iron Fist Fort's last line of defense against the Ash Fort army had been shattered by the advancing Liu Ming and the Kangal Bloodbeast. His mind was no longer preoccupied with resisting, but rather with finding a way to surrender without losing face and still reap the benefits. Furthermore, wars between ruling settlements were generally limited to disputes over resources and interests, and population was a crucial resource in the apocalypse, so widespread slaughter was unlikely. As the defenders turned their gazes towards Blood Vampire General CXIU, their hopes had already shifted towards retreat. And in that moment of hesitation, Ash Fort's troops had already surged into the effective range of Iron Fist Fort's long-range attacks. But without the Vampire General's orders, none of the professionals, whether operating ranged weapons or possessing ranged attack capabilities, dared to launch an attack on their own initiative. And even with this momentary hesitation, the Ash Castle troops had already kicked up a cloud of dust, drawing ever closer to the shattered gates of Iron Fist Castle. The city's capture seemed inevitable. At this moment, at the end of the several forked roads at the intersection in front of Iron Fist Castle, several clearly visible dark figures were rapidly approaching the battlefield. Those who come with ill intentions will not come. The vest at the front of the convoy observed the scene first, and muttered a few words under his breath. Chu Gang, Liu Huchun, Yang Fengchen, Li Sang Teo, Gu Yun, Han Piaxu, pay attention to the enemy on the left and right flanks. Yun Fang Hua, pay attention to the rear. He then immediately issued instructions to the various Iron Guard captains in the convoy using his communication equipment. Gong Weeksin, you stay and take command. 7 Iron Guard captains, along with the vehicles carrying 7 teams of Iron Guard, quickly separated from the convoy. Each modified vehicle turned its front end, forming an arc-shaped defensive circle, to attack the unknown enemy forces attacking from multiple directions. The remaining 5 teams of Iron Guard, led by Ma Jun, continued their assault on Iron Fist Fort. Liu Huchuan watched the approaching enemy troops with excitement. He sneered at the dozens of prisoners from the 3-fort coalition assigned to him, saying, "This is your first battle. If you give your all, I can make your future life easier. Otherwise, if you try to play tricks on me, or even turn against me, you'll be dead. Keep an eye on these guys. Anyone who moves will be killed." The dozens of prisoners' expressions changed at this. Their previous plan of giving their all but no effort seemed impossible. Dozens of prisoners crammed into 3 truck-turned-truck vehicles, each clutching their crude weapons under the watchful gaze of the Iron Guards, each one bracing themselves for a decisive battle. Liu Huchuan scoffed, unconvinced these men would exert any effort. But he had said enough. As for their performance, it all depended on their actual combat performance. A cold glint flashed in his eyes. If their performance didn't satisfy him, he wouldn't even consider letting half, or even more, die. This scene unfolded across the various Iron Guards. Liu Ming had divided the prisoners among the various Iron Guards precisely to provide oversight and supervision. Otherwise, if these prisoners were to gather together, they would be difficult to command, and could even hinder the fight, based on the belief that the law doesn't apply to the masses. Nearby, several groups of troops, rapidly approaching the Ashford defense convoy, finally converged at an intersection. The leaders of these factions, intent on attacking the Ashford forces from both sides and simultaneously attacking Iron Fist Skiafeng, gathered at ease. This tactic will surely catch Ash Castle off guard. It's one thing for them to destroy the 3-fort coalition, but they are already trying to take over the 3 forts before they've even caught their breath. With their limited numbers, aren't they afraid of being decimated? The leader of one faction said with a chuckle, looking at the Ash Castle troops in the distance, who were watching them with a warlike eye. Fei Long, you've got a good idea this time. We'll attack them from both sides. Their vanguard will be engaged with the Blood Vampire Society and the Iron Fist Society, and then we'll be able to outflank them. We'll make sure they're severely injured, lest they destroy the 3 forts and claim to be the dominant force west of Wuling City. The leader of another faction chimed in. These 4 factions were the 6 remaining forts that had previously formed the 9-fort coalition and retreated at a crucial moment. Even with their retreat, they were hoping to reap the benefits. Therefore, some had been secretly observing the outcome of the Ash Castle battle. However, they hadn't expected such a dramatic turn of events. The astonishing strength displayed by Ash Castle completely shattered their hopes of reaping the benefits. Therefore, they ultimately didn't take advantage of the devastating defeat of Ash Fort and the coalition of the 3 forts. They hadn't joined forces until now. They were confident in the strength of the self-proclaimed general of the Vampire Society. Even if they couldn't withstand the insanely powerful Ash Fort leader, they could at least hold them off for a while. And if he could hold off half of Ash Fort's main force, they could outflank and eliminate the remaining half. Their plan envisioned that, if the 2 forces could eventually join forces, Ash Fort's attempt to capture Iron Fist Fort would be dimmed. The thought of this made the leaders of the smaller forts beam with joy, as if they could instantly annihilate the Ash Fort army, ultimately dividing Iron Fist Fort among the 4 factions. They were deeply envious of the Iron Fist Society's resources, especially the Xiling locomotive factory, whose equipment was well preserved and production capacity remained largely intact. Aside from the Iron Fist Club's steel cavalry, no other settlement in the entire Wuling region, including the Eastern Security Zone, representing the military and political forces, was so extravagant as to afford every member a vehicle. This was especially true of heavy motorcycles, vehicles well suited to the apocalyptic environment. Almost 9 out of 10 roads throughout Wuling City were in a semi-abandoned state, which was why the Ash Fort convoy, just a mere 10 or 20 kilometers from Iron Fist Fort, took nearly an hour to reach. Vehicles struggled to navigate these roads unimpeded, but heavy motorcycles, with their specially treated wheels, were able to maneuver just as smoothly. Therefore, the Iron Fist Club's steel cavalry possessed nearly unparalleled mobility throughout the Wuling region. The thought of their own armed forces being equipped with these highly maneuverable vehicles on a large scale filled the 4 leaders with excitement. Confidence surged as they watched 4 separate armies approach the Ash Fort rear from 3 separate forks in the road. Their vehicles laden with armed warriors nearly tripled the number of the Ash Fort troops, completely blocking all 3 of the Ash Fort's retreat routes. I wanted to yell, "You are surrounded," to the Ash Fort troops, and then lead them to attack. P.S. I fell asleep while quickly coding the 3rd chapter yesterday and didn't upload it, so I'll make up for it today. Chapter 349, Public Opinion. There were 7 Iron Guard squads in total, plus the cannon fodder from the prisoner of war camp and the makeshift demon hunters. Each squadron could only directly deploy around 100 men. Chu Gang's Iron Guards, along with Yang Fengchen and Han Piaoxu, held the main right-hand road. Their mission concluded with 2 separate enemy groups approaching from that direction. Li Santeo and Liu Huchuan held the left flank, while Yun Fanghua, still relatively well preserved, held the rear road. Finally, Gu Yun, whose strength hadn't fully recovered, led his 30-something men in the center of the defensive circle. His dozens of Iron Guards, divided into 3 groups, provided reinforcement, ready to support the 3 fronts. The prisoners he was responsible for overseeing the battle had been assigned to Yun Fanghua's command, serving as the first line of defense against incoming enemies from the rear. These prisoners from the 3 forts looked nervous, apprehensive, and watched the approaching enemy forces with a touch of fear. They naturally recognized these sudden arrivals as former allies of the 9 forts coalition. The captives weren't surprised at the ambush attempts by these unscrupulous individuals, who had deserted the coalition mid-stride. Instead, they instinctively felt fear at the disparate numbers. Even more alarming was the fact that all their equipment and weapons had been confiscated, leaving them with only standard Ashford weapons. Besides their clothing, they possessed no armor. Surviving the chaotic battle meant fighting tooth and nail to the death, killing every enemy who threatened them. Even these evolved classes feared for their lives. In contrast to the pre-war atmosphere, back in Iron Fist Fort, the Ashford forces, led by Ma Jun and Fang and Steelhood guards, had successfully entered the city, encountering little resistance along the way. This smooth entry was made possible by Liu Ming's use of the Kang Hook Blood Beast to shatter the city gates and defeat the defending Iron Fist cavalry. Vampire General CXIU knew the situation was hopeless. Any further resistance and casualties would only bring disaster upon himself. In the end, it would be better to simply allow the Ash Castle troops to enter the city. While the members of the Iron Fist Club faced the Ash Castle troops' hatred and remained silent, the ordinary survivors of Iron Fist Fort showed little reaction, or rather, remained silent. By then, news of the complete annihilation of Iron Fist Fort's leaders, Yang Wan and Chen Humin, along with the main force, had spread throughout the fort. But for most ordinary people, this news was a welcome relief. Yang Wan and Chen Humin, and indeed the entire Iron Fist Club, were fundamentally unpopular. Compared to Ash Castle, when the 9 fortresses approached, all the ordinary survivors willingly cooperated with the higher-ups' decisions and even helped deploy defenses. Iron Fist Fort's heavy losses were actually welcome news for its numerous survivors. Furthermore, when Vampire and Iron Fist leaders like Razor began their emergency defenses, they paid no heed to the lives of the survivors, simply dispatching emergency evacuations. All Iron Fist factories were shut down, and workers and survivors alike returned to their homes to await the end of the war. No other measures were taken. Even the survivors' food rations were not distributed, leaving those who had toiled all day to earn them starving in their rooms. Iron Fist Castle, like Ash Castle, implemented food rationing, with fixed and meager daily rations, leaving few survivors with surplus food at home. However, when the fighting began, the Iron Fist Club's leaders, desperate to fill the void, showed no concern for the lives of the survivors, and made no effort to arrange for them to collect their food rations. All Iron Fist members, including those with support-type evolutionary classes, had lost their weapons, and were participating in the city's defense. Instead, without Iron Fist's supervision, the 20,000 survivors of Iron Fist Castle failed to comply with the club's instructions to return to their homes and avoid venturing out. Instead, they gathered in groups of 3 or 4, discussing and speculating about the war. Li Yuan, an electrician at the Iron Fist Fort power plant, was one of these offenders. In peacetime, he worked at the power supply station in the rural-urban fringe. After the disaster, he moved all the way to Iron Fist Fort, where he played his true self, becoming an electrician in a new world. He and several of his colleagues were holed up in their foreman's residence. They all worked in the same motor room at the power plant, so they were close to each other. It was midday in March or April, and the temperature was quite high. A shirtless electrician, his muscular frame exposed, broke the silence, saying, "The battle has begun at the city gate." A hint of excitement crossed his face as he spoke. "Foreman, who are you?" I said. "Why are you so excited about the start of a war? When gods fight, mortals suffer. Wait until the next attack falls on us, and you'll see if you can still be excited." The sturdy man said with a smile, "Boss, that's wrong. When the Iron Fist is in charge, how can we guys make a name for ourselves? We are electricians, but our status and identity are no different from those refugees at the bottom. Don't even mention the superpowered people in the Steel Cavalry. Even the patrols responsible for maintaining daily order in the gathering place are all made up of relatives and confidants of those superpowered people. Those damn directors and factory managers of the power plant are all inextricably linked to the top management of the Iron Fist. Only us poor guys are ordered around to work hard every day, and we don't eat much better than those refugees. Who the hell would admit that? Without us poor guys, they can't run the power plant with those guys, let alone generate electricity. They'll be considered powerful if they don't get electrocuted themselves. Now that the Iron Fist has been defeated, and the Iron Fist Castle has changed hands, maybe this is our chance." As he spoke, the sturdy man's eyes sparkled, and he gazed at the crowd with anticipation. This scene shocked Li Yuan deeply. He saw ambition in the eyes and words of this colleague, who used to work silently and rarely spoke. In this era, where even survival is difficult, after more than half a year of disaster, most people have become numb. How many people still maintain such ambition? He had no idea that his colleague was one of them. They chatted, mostly the sturdy man talking while they listened. After an unknown amount of time, the sounds of fierce fighting at the city wall suddenly ceased. The conversation also stopped. Everyone guessed what this ceasefire meant. The outcome of the war was definitely decided. They had originally hoped that Iron Fist fort would win. After all, even if its ruler, Iron Fist, ruled with oppression, at least everyone had a chance to make a living. If a new master came, who knew if they could still make a living? After all, the unknown and change are difficult choices for most people who are content with the status quo. But after the strong man's brainwashing propaganda, they secretly hope that the Iron Fist will bring bad luck to those high-level bigwigs who used to treat them as human beings, and hope that Iron Fist Castle will win a new ruling class. And among the ordinary survivors of the entire Ash Castle, there are definitely many people who have the same idea. My throat hurts. Fengsha seems to have a cold. I owe you an update tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Chapter 350 Heavy Truck Speeding. Kill. A solemn cry echoed from the Ash Fort camp. The crackle of gunfire suddenly rang out. Countless stray bullets sparked in the air as they unleashed a barrage of fire towards the enemy forces approaching from 3 distant directions. Ding, ding, ding. Bang, bang. The heavily armored trucks were soon riddled with dents from the stray bullets. However, despite the seemingly ferocious firepower, the trucks maintained their speed, their loads of powerful warriors charging towards the Ash Fort defensive formation. Facing the Ash Fort hail of bullets, the soldiers aboard the armored trucks, under cover of their firing positions, fired back from their rifles through their embrasures. The two sides exchanged blows, the fighting fiercely. If it weren't for the occasional scattering of fireballs, ice arrows, lightning, and other supernatural attacks that marred the backdrop, this could have been a purely physical battle. Simultaneously, the attacking forces from the 4 smaller forts began to assault from 3 directions, braving the intense firepower. The firearms seized from the 3 forts coalition now demonstrated their impressive lethality. From a distance of hundreds of meters, they opened fire fiercely at the oncoming steel convoy. However, these firearms, mere pistols and ordinary rifles, proved ineffective against armored trucks with defenses comparable to those of main battle tanks. Countless stray bullets sparked a series of explosions off the truck's armor, but they were unable to penetrate the defenses. This, in turn, allowed the assault troops to draw ever closer to the Ash Fort positions. The situation on the left and right sides of the defenses was largely the same. They could only watch the overwhelming number of enemy forces approach, helplessly intercepting them with limited success. Conversely, Yun Fanghua, single-handedly guarding the rear, led her troops to effectively intercept and halt the rapid advance of the enemy forces from behind. Yun Fanghua's troops survived the Ash Fort battle remarkably well. This wasn't due to her intentional concealment of her strength, rather, their combat participation and achievements were among the highest among the Iron Guards. The primary reason for their survival was that the evolved classes under her command were primarily spellcasters. As the strongest fire-wielding warrior in Ashburg, she naturally held a strong allure for spellcasters. Coupled with her striking appearance and alluring figure, many casters joined her ranks without hesitation when the Iron Guard was formed. Spellcasters, especially ranged ones, naturally relied on the protection of numerous tanks in battle. Consequently, Yun Fanghua, leading a squad of fragile Iron Guards, suffered the lowest casualties in the Battle of Ashburg. Over 100 Iron Guards still retained their combat effectiveness. This, in turn, posed a grave calamity to the enemy advancing from the rear. 5 armored trucks advanced into the range of the ranged casters, sending a dazzling display of energy like fireworks through the air. Frost lashed the truck's wheels, drastically slowing their propulsion, as if they were driving on a frosty road in the cold. The blazing flames that pierced the truck's interiors tormented the soldiers, like being trapped in a steel furnace. The most deadly attacks were those of lightning and thunder. Even the armored trucks, no matter how fortified, were conductive, and each shock sent the pilots into a state of ecstasy and excruciating pain. Compared to the other 2 directions, the 5 armored trucks advancing from the rear road were moving at a snail's pace, effectively stalling the larger forces behind them. The commander of the small fortress in charge of this advance was furious. When they joined forces to launch this extortion operation against Ash Castle and Iron Fist Castle, the leaders of the four factions had agreed that whoever contributed the most and achieved the most in the war would ultimately share the largest share of the profits. Seeing his other three allies advancing at a breakneck pace, while his own continued to sluggishly drag on, he felt both anxious and furious. However, after a while, he became grateful for the formidable interception from Ash Castle's main force, even gloating over the snail's pace of his own troops. Liu Ming, who had been accepting the surrender of the terrified Iron Fist Fort's defenders at the gates, turned his head as the battle unfolded behind him, and saw unfamiliar enemy forces attacking from three separate routes. Who are they? Liu Ming frowned and asked Ma Jun, who had already led his troops to reinforce. Liu Ming had rushed back to the scene at the crucial moment, when the 9 forts coalition had collapsed, with only 3 remaining to attack Iron Fist Fort. Therefore, he was unfamiliar with the other 6 forts. Boss, they are 4 of the 6 remaining smaller forts in the original 9 forts coalition, Ma Jun explained. Liu Ming snorted coldly and shouted, "They've arrived. I leave this place to you. Everyone will be taken prisoners for now. Anyone who refuses to lay down their weapons will be considered a stubborn resistance and must be eliminated." Leaving the Iron Fist's already decided battle to Ma Jun Fangan and his men, Liu Ming's flame dragon wing cloak fluttered in the wind. Unfurling his flaming wings, he soared into the air, darting towards the rear battlefield. After watching Liu Ming leave, Ma Jun waved his hand, and his iron guards immediately rushed into Iron Fist Fort, beginning to control the situation. Liu Ming, in a matter of seconds, scurried across the hundreds of meters and arrived at the Ash Castle camp. Seeing their leader arrive, the Ash Castle Iron Guards, already completely overwhelmed and at a disadvantage against the combined enemy attack, suddenly beamed with joy, believing their leader would single-handedly defeat the enemy. After all, Liu Ming's nearly unmatched prowess during the Battle of Ash Castle had instilled confidence in everyone. However, upon arriving at the formation, Liu Ming showed no signs of imminent action. Instead, he approached a dozen or so heavily loaded trucks at the rear. Each of these trucks appeared heavily loaded, their tires warped and deformed by the weight of the loads, revealing the weight within. Despite the battle already underway, the drivers of these heavy trucks remained relaxed in their cabs. They were all assigned to Liu Ming, responsible for transporting hundreds of gargoyle armies. Their driving skills weren't particularly impressive, but rather focused on stability. At that moment, Liu Ming leaped into the cab of the last armored truck and issued an order. Immediately, more than a dozen trucks from Ashford, carrying gargoyles, sprang into action under Liu Ming's command. Liu Ming's lead vehicle, this one primarily carried the strongest lava gargoyles. Therefore, Liu Ming had high hopes for it. Over a dozen trucks, seemingly oblivious to the enemy's attacks, sped off in 3 directions, knocking armored trucks significantly heavier than their own into a corner, forcing a path through the enemy's path and escaping. The Ashford trucks had naturally been modified and reinforced, but their defense was naturally inferior to the enemy's armored trucks, which were specifically designed for assault. However, they eventually managed to stagger out of the enemy's encirclement. P.S. The temperature has dropped, so everyone should stay warm. The sandstorm has already hit me, and my cold, which hasn't healed after a week, has only gotten worse. I bought some medicine today, hoping I'll be better tomorrow. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.